I created a design software that boosted my wife's father bankrupt company to $370 million in profit in a year. But suddenly, on his son's 16th birthday, my wife's dad gifted him the entire business. When I confronted him, he laughed at me and handed me $100, saying, "This is your actual value." I quietly left. But the next morning, when they arrived at work, I still have the $100 bill. It sits in my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license, crisp and undamaged despite everything that's happened since. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the weight of the past year presses down on my chest like a physical thing, I take it out and hold it up to the light. Benjamin Franklin stares back at me with that knowing expression, and I wonder if he'd find the irony as bitter as I do. $100. That's what Richard Castellano, my father-in-law, mentor, the man I'd rebuilt an empire for, decided I was worth. Not even enough for a decent dinner in the city, he now ruled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the problem with revenge, even the quiet kind. Even the elegant kind, that plays out in spreadsheets and legal documents, rather than fists and shouting. It compresses time in your memory. The before and after become so starkly divided that you forget there was ever a middle, ever a time when you believed in the goodness of people, in the reciprocity of loyalty, in the basic human decency of those you called family. Let me start where all good tragedies start, with hope. 3 years ago, I married Elena Castellano in a ceremony that cost more than my parents' house. I didn't pay for it, of course. Richard did, and he made sure everyone knew it, not cruelly, but with that particular brand of benevolent patriarch energy that makes you feel simultaneously grateful and insignificant. The wedding was at his estate in the Hamptons. 500 guests, a 10-piece orchestra, flowers that had been flown in from Ecuador because Elena had once mentioned, in passing, that she loved orchids. I loved her desperately, the way you love someone when you're 28 and still believe that love conquers the practical realities of class difference. Elena was beautiful in the way that money makes people beautiful, not just genetics, though she had those too, but the kind of beauty that comes from a lifetime of excellent nutrition, dermatologists, personal trainers, and the confidence of never having worried about rent. I was beautiful in a different way, I suppose. The way that hunger makes you sharp. The way that coding for 16 hours straight gives you a certain intensity in your eyes. The way that building something from nothing makes you stand a little taller, even when you're standing next to men in custom suits that cost more than your car. Richard liked that about me, I think. In the beginning, "You've got fire." He told me once, during the engagement, after I'd had too much of his 25-year-old scotch and started explaining my vision for integrated design automation systems, "Not many kids your age have fire anymore. They want, but they don't burn." I burned. God, did I burn. The company, Castellano Design and Architecture, had been Richard's life's work. He'd started it in the 70s, built it through the boom years, watched it become synonymous with luxury commercial development on the East Coast. By the time I entered the picture, it was dying. Not dramatically, not with sudden bankruptcy or scandal, but with the slow, inevitable decline of a business model that hadn't evolved with the times. Their design process was baroque in its inefficiency. Architects worked in isolation, their renderings passing through layers of revision that could take months. Structural engineers recalculated load-bearing calculations by hand because they didn't trust the software. The estimating department used spreadsheets that had been built in 2003 and updated so many times they were more patch than program. Projects that should have taken 8 months stretched to 18. Clients who should have paid millions walked away frustrated. Richard knew it was dying. I could see it in the way his shoulders curved inward during board meetings, the way he'd stare at spreadsheets like they were written in a language he'd once known but had forgotten. "We're bleeding out," he told me one night, 6 months after the wedding. We were in his study, that wood-paneled sanctuary that smelled of leather and old tobacco, and he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, mortal, afraid. The Riverside project fell through today. That's 4 major contracts in 6 months. At this rate, we'll be shutting doors by Christmas. Elena had been crying when I came home that night. Not delicate tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from watching your entire world crumble. Her brother Marcus was 16, still in private school, still planning on Yale. Her mother, Margaret's entire identity was wrapped up in charity galas and country club memberships. And Elena herself, she'd never worked, never needed to, but she'd also never imagined a life where the Castellano name didn't mean something. "I can fix it," I said. I don't know where the confidence came from. Maybe from the same place that had gotten me through MIT on scholarships while working 2 jobs. Maybe from the same place that had taught me to code when I was 12 because my parents couldn't afford a computer, so I'd use the ones at the library, staying until closing, writing programs on paper when I couldn't get screen time. Maybe from the same place that had made me fall in love with a woman so far above my station that our marriage had caused her grandmother to actually clutch her pearls. "I can fix it," I said again. And this time, Elena looked at me like I was her salvation. I designed the software in 4 months. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever created, and I've created a lot of beautiful things. An integrated design platform that connected architects, engineers, estimators, and project managers in real time. Automated rendering engines that could generate 3-dimensional models from 2-dimensional plans in minutes instead of days. Structural analysis tools that ran complex calculations in seconds. A bidding system that interfaced directly with supplier databases, updating material costs automatically. I called it Prometheus. Not very subtle, I know. But I was young, and I was giving fire to people who'd lost their way in the dark. And the irony of the name, the punishment that came after the gift, hadn't occurred to me yet. It worked like magic. Like actual magic. The first project we tested it on was a commercial complex in Boston. It had been estimated at 18 months and $47 million. With Prometheus, we delivered it in 9 months at $41 million. And the quality was better. The client was ecstatic. They gave us 3 more projects immediately. Word spread the way word spreads in industries built on relationships and reputation. Castellano Design and Architecture had figured something out. They had an edge. They were fast, they were efficient, they were accurate. Richard started taking meetings again with the confidence of a man who'd been given a second life. Within a year, the company went from bleeding to thriving. Within 18 months, we'd tripled our client base. Projects that had languished for years suddenly moved forward. New clients appeared, drawn by the legend of what we could do. I trained the staff personally, worked 70, 80-hour weeks, making sure everyone understood not just how to use Prometheus, but why it worked, how to maximize its potential. I became the indispensable man, the one everyone called when something went wrong, when a project hit a snag, when a client needed to be impressed. Richard promoted me to Chief Technology Officer, gave me an office 3 doors down from his, started calling me son in a way that felt more genuine than when my actual father said it. My father, who'd told me that marrying into the Castellano family was above my raising and hadn't spoken to me since the wedding. "You saved us," Richard said one night, the 2 of us alone after a board meeting where we'd announced record profits. "You saved my family, my legacy, everything I built. I won't forget that." I believed him. That's the thing about betrayal. It only works if you believe first. The numbers kept climbing. By the end of the 2nd year, we'd gone from a company on the verge of bankruptcy to a company worth $200 million. By the middle of the 3rd year this year, the year everything fell apart, we were approaching $370 million in valuation. Investment firms were calling. Acquisition offers were coming in. Richard was being profiled in business magazines, hailed as a visionary who'd revolutionized commercial design. In the articles, I was mentioned in passing. Castellano's son-in-law, a programmer, sometimes not mentioned at all. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that I'd done it for Elena, for family, for love. I told myself that recognition wasn't the point, that the work itself was the reward, that seeing something I'd built with my own hands save the people I cared about was enough. I told myself a lot of things. Marcus's 16th birthday party was scheduled for a Saturday in September. The weather was perfect, that crystalline autumn clarity that makes the world look photoshopped, everything sharp-edged and impossibly vivid. Richard had rented out the country club, the same one where I'd been a guest at my own wedding, where I'd learned to smile politely when old men asked what I did and looked disappointed when I said software development. 300 people attended. There was a band, a DJ for later, an ice sculpture of a Lamborghini because Marcus was obsessed with cars. The cake was 4 tiers. The presents filled an entire room. I was standing near the bar, nursing a whiskey and watching Elena laugh with her cousins when Richard found me. He had that particular energy he got when he was about to make an announcement that barely contained excitement that made him seem 20 years younger. "Come with me," he said. "I want you there for this." I followed him to the main ballroom, where someone had set up a microphone and a small stage. The crowd quieted as Richard stepped up, and I stood off to the side, smiling, expecting a typical birthday speech, something about Marcus growing up, becoming a man, the future of the Castellano family. "Today, my son turns 16, Richard began, and the crowd applauded. And 16 is a special age. Not quite a man, but not a boy anymore. It's the age where we start thinking about the future, about legacy, about what we're going to build with our lives." Marcus was called up to the stage, grinning, probably expecting car keys or a trip or a watch. "Marcus, you've grown up watching me build Castellano design and architecture," Richard continued. "You've seen the struggles, the victories, the evolution of this company from something your grandfather started to something that now shapes the skyline of major cities. And I want you to know that all of it has been for you." He paused, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "So today, on your 16th birthday, I'm giving you the company." The crowd gasped. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Margaret started crying. Marcus looked stunned. "Dad, I don't understand." "The paperwork is already done," Richard said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Effective immediately, you are the majority owner of Castellano Design and Architecture. I'll stay on as CEO for now, guide you, teach you, everything I know. But this company, this legacy, this empire, it's yours, son. It's always been meant for you." The applause was deafening. I stood there, frozen, while the crowd surged forward to congratulate Marcus, to shake Richard's hand, to toast to the future of the Castellano dynasty. Elena was hugging her brother, crying, and she caught my eye over his shoulder and smiled like this was wonderful, like this was exactly how things should be. I waited until the initial chaos died down, waited until Richard was alone for a moment, accepting a fresh drink from a waiter. Then I approached him, keeping my voice calm, professional. "Richard, can we talk?" He turned, and his smile was genuine, warm. "Of course. Quite a surprise, wasn't it? I wanted to tell you beforehand, but I thought the spontaneity would make it more special." "I need to understand something," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant. "The company Prometheus, the systems I built, the contracts I negotiated, the training programs I developed, all of that is now owned by Marcus?" Richard's smile didn't fade, but something shifted in his eyes, a wariness. "It's owned by Castellano Design and Architecture, which is now primarily Marcus's. Yes." "Why?" "Because I built it," I said, and I heard my voice start to rise and forced it back down. "Richard, I saved this company. 3 years ago, you were months from bankruptcy. Everything that's happened since, the growth, the profits, the reputation, that's because of what I created. And we're grateful," Richard said, but his tone had cooled. "You've been well compensated. Your salary is generous. You have excellent benefits. What exactly are you asking for?" "I'm asking for recognition," I said. "I'm asking for a stake in what I built. Partnership. Equity. Something that reflects my contribution." Richard looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Not just dismissal, but contempt. The kind of contempt that's been there all along, hidden behind affection and gratitude and that word son that I'd been fool enough to believe. "You married my daughter," he said quietly. "You live in a house I bought. You drive a car I helped you finance. You attend parties like this, meet people like this, because of me. And you think that because you wrote some software, you deserve to own part of my family's legacy?" Each word was a knife, precise and deliberate. "I didn't just write some software," I said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice. "Richard, without me, there is no company. You said it yourself. I saved you. And I thanked you," he said. "I gave you a job, a salary, access to a life you'd never have had otherwise. What more do you want? I want what's fair." He laughed, actually laughed. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and extracted a $100 bill. He held it out to me, and when I didn't take it, he tucked it into my jacket pocket. "This is your actual value," he said. "A hired hand, a useful tool. But don't confuse usefulness with indispensability. There are 1,000 programmers who could have done what you did. The only reason you're here at all is because you married my daughter." The crowd was watching now. Not obviously, but I could feel the weight of their attention. The way conversations had quieted. The way heads were turned just slightly in our direction. "Richard, we're done here," he said. "Enjoy the party. Try the shrimp. They're excellent." He walked away, and I stood there, feeling the $100 bill in my pocket like a brand, like a mark of ownership, like proof of exactly how little I'd ever mattered. I didn't make a scene, didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't fight. I found Elena, kissed her cheek, told her I wasn't feeling well. She was too caught up in the celebration to really notice, just squeezed my hand and told me to feel better. I drove home in silence, sat in our living room, the living room in the house Richard had bought, and stared at the walls until the sun set and the room grew dark around me. And then I started planning. Because Richard had made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, in his certainty that I was just a tool to be used and discarded, he'd forgotten something important. I didn't just build Prometheus. I built it with keys. And I was the only one who had them all. The thing about building something powerful is that you have to understand destruction first. I learned that at MIT, in a structural engineering course I took as an elective, because Elena had mentioned once that she found architecture romantic. The professor, Dr. Cardenas, was old school, the kind of man who still used overhead projectors and referred to computers as thinking machines, with a mixture of respect and suspicion. But he understood buildings in a way that transcended the digital, understood them as living systems of tension and support. Every structure, he told us, has critical points: load-bearing walls, foundation anchors, stress distributors. Remove the right one, and the whole thing comes down. But here's what separates an engineer from a vandal. An engineer knows exactly which point to remove, exactly how much force to apply, and exactly what the collapse will look like before it happens. I thought about that lecture a lot in the days after Marcus's birthday party. Sat in my home office, the one room in the house that still felt like mine, filled with monitors and servers and the quiet hum of machines that didn't judge and thought about critical points, about load-bearing structures, about the difference between vandalism and precision. Prometheus wasn't just software. That's what Richard had never understood, what none of them had understood. It wasn't a tool you could hand to someone else and expect the same results. It was an ecosystem, an interconnected web of systems and subsystems, each one dependent on the others, each one calibrated to specific parameters that I'd spent months refining. And I'd built it with 3 kinds of keys. The first kind was obvious, the kind any competent software developer would include: administrative access, user permissions, security protocols. Richard's IT department managed these, and they were good at their jobs. Not great, but good enough that they'd probably catch any obvious attempt to lock people out or corrupt data. The second kind was less obvious: proprietary algorithms buried deep in the code, optimization routines that made Prometheus fast and accurate in ways that competitors couldn't replicate. These were protected by obfuscation, by complexity, by the simple fact that the codebase was now so large, over 2 million lines, that no one except me understood how all the pieces fit together. But the third kind was invisible. Dependencies. Prometheus ran on a series of external services and databases that I'd set up in the early days, when Richard's IT infrastructure was still a joke and I'd needed to move fast. Cloud servers for rendering, API endpoints for real-time collaboration, third-party services for material pricing, structural calculations, environmental impact assessments. The entire system was distributed across 17 different platforms, some commercial, some open source, some custom-built. And every single one of those connections ran through authentication systems that I controlled. Not the company. Me. I'd used my personal accounts to set them up. Had paid for some of them with my own credit card in the beginning, before Richard understood what I was building. The credentials, the API keys, the security certificates, they were all tied to email addresses and accounts that only I had access to. It had been expedience at the time, not planning. Move fast and break things. Isn't that what they say? Get it working first. Clean it up later. Except I'd never cleaned it up, and Richard's IT department had been so grateful to have working systems that they'd never questioned the architecture underneath. I spent 3 days mapping everything out. Not on the company network, I wasn't stupid, but on a laptop that had never connected to Castellano systems, using a VPN that routed through 3 different countries. I documented every dependency, every authentication point, every critical service that Prometheus relied on. Then I started testing. Not destructively. Not yet. Just gentle probes, seeing what happened when certain services experienced brief outages. 5 minutes of downtime on the rendering servers. An hour of restricted access to the material pricing database. Small hiccups, the kind that happen naturally in any complex system that IT would write off as normal fluctuations. The results were illuminating. Without the rendering servers, architects couldn't generate the 3D models that clients expected. Projects slowed. Without the material pricing database, estimators had to call suppliers manually, adding days to the bidding process. Without the real-time collaboration tools, the entire workflow fragmented back into the siloed, inefficient mess it had been before I arrived. Each piece seemed small, but together, they were everything. I could bring the whole thing down. Not dramatically, not with a single catastrophic failure that would scream sabotage, but slowly, systematically, death by 1,000 cuts. Projects would start missing deadlines, estimates would come in wrong, clients would grow frustrated, and everyone would assume it was technical degradation, the inevitable decay that happens to all software over time without proper maintenance. Without me, the thought should have brought satisfaction, should have felt like justice, like the elegant revenge that Richard deserved, but instead, I felt hollow, sick, because destroying what I'd built meant destroying the only thing I'd ever created that mattered, the only proof that I was more than what Richard said, a useful tool, easily replaced, worth $100. Elena found me in my office on the 4th night, 3 in the morning, surrounded by screens covered in code and architecture diagrams. She stood in the doorway in one of my old t-shirts, her hair pulled back, looking impossibly young and impossibly far away. "You haven't been sleeping," she said. "Been busy." "With what?" I gestured at the screens. "Work stuff. System maintenance." She drifted closer, perched on the edge of my desk. We'd been married 3 years, but sometimes I still couldn't believe I got to touch her, got to wake up next to her, got to call someone like her my wife. Old habits from my old life, from the world where people like me didn't end up with people like her. "Dad told me you two had words," she said carefully, "at Marcus's party." "Did he tell you what he said?" "He said you were upset about the company transfer, that you felt like you should have been consulted." I laughed, and it came out bitter. "Consulted? Is that what he called it?" "He said you'd understand eventually, that it's a family matter, and Marcus is the heir, and that's just how these things work in families like ours." She paused. "Like mine." The correction was small, but significant. Families like hers, not like ours, because I wasn't really family, was I? Not in the way that mattered. Not in the way that got you companies worth hundreds of millions. "Elena, I saved that company. You know that, right? 3 years ago, your father was 6 months from bankruptcy. Prometheus. Everything I built, that's the only reason Castellano Design exists right now. I know, she said, and she sounded tired. And we're all grateful. Dad's grateful. He talks about you all the time, about how brilliant you are, how lucky we were that you came into our lives. He gave Marcus the company. He gave Marcus the family business. That's different. How? Because Marcus is his son, she said, and there was an edge to her voice now, a defensiveness I recognized. Because that's how legacy works. My father built that company from nothing, and he gets to decide what happens to it. He built it from nothing, I repeated, and I rebuilt it from bankruptcy. But apparently, that doesn't count. Elena stood up, wrapped her arms around herself. What do you want, exactly? You have a job, a good job. You're CTO of a major company. You make excellent money. We have this house. We have a good life. What more are you asking for? And there it was. The same question Richard had asked, phrased more gently but with the same underlying assumption. That I should be grateful for what I'd been given. That wanting more was greedy, presumptuous, proof that I didn't understand my place. I want recognition, I said quietly. I want equity. I want a stake in what I built. You didn't build it alone. My father. Your father was 6 months from closing the doors when I started. Elena, you know this. You were there. You saw what it was like, and you fixed it. And we're grateful. But that doesn't mean you own it. The word hung between us. Own. As if ownership was something granted from above, not earned through work, through sacrifice, through the kind of 70-hour weeks that had left me exhausted and wired and convinced I was building something that mattered. He gave me $100, I said. Elena blinked. What? At the party. When I asked about equity, about partnership, about anything that reflected what I'd contributed, he pulled out his wallet and gave me a $100 bill and told me that was my actual value. Her face went pale. He didn't. He did. In front of half the party. That's not what he told me. He said you two had a disagreement, that you were emotional, that he'd talk to you when things cooled down. I pulled the $100 bill from my wallet, the one I'd been carrying like evidence, like a reminder of exactly what I was worth to the Castellano family, held it up between us. She stared at it, then at me, and I watched something shift in her face, some calculation happening behind her eyes. Trying to reconcile the man she loved with the man her father had described. Trying to figure out who was telling the truth, who was being reasonable, who was the villain in this story. Maybe you misunderstood, she said finally. Maybe it was a joke that came out wrong. Dad has a strange sense of humor sometimes. Elena, or maybe you were being demanding, and he reacted badly. He's been under a lot of stress with the company transition. Are you serious right now? I'm trying to understand. Her voice rose, cracking. I'm trying to understand why you're sitting in here at 3 a.m, obsessing over code, looking at me like I'm the enemy. I'm trying to understand why you can't just be happy that my family is successful, that Marcus has a future, that we're all doing well. Because it's my success, I said. It's my work. And your father just gave it to a 16-year-old kid and told me I was worth $100. So what are you going to do? She was crying now, angry tears. Quit? Sue? Destroy everything out of spite? The question sat between us like a grenade. I could tell her, could explain exactly what I was capable of doing, exactly how dependent the company was on systems only I controlled, exactly how easily the whole empire could crumble. Could make her understand that this wasn't spite, it was justice. It was the natural consequence of treating people as disposable. But looking at her tears, at the way she'd wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold her world together, I realized she'd already chosen. Maybe not consciously, maybe not completely, but the choice was there in the way she'd asked what he told me, instead of believing what I'd said. In the way she'd suggested I'd misunderstood, been too demanding, was being emotional. In the way she'd said, families like mine, instead of families like ours. I'm not going to do anything, I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I'm just going to work, that's all. Just work. She nodded, relieved, and wiped at her eyes. Came over and kissed my forehead, and I smelled her shampoo, the same expensive brand she'd used since we met, and felt the distance between us like a physical thing. "Come to bed soon?" she asked. "Soon." End quote. She left, and I sat there in the glow of my monitors, looking at the architecture of Prometheus spread across the screens. All those interconnected systems, all those dependencies, all those single points of failure that only I knew about. Dr. Cardenas had been right. The difference between an engineer and a vandal was knowing exactly which point to remove, exactly how much force to apply, and exactly what the collapse would look like. But he'd left something out. The difference between an engineer and an artist was knowing how to make the collapse look like an accident. I spent the next week at the office acting completely normal. Attended meetings, reviewed code, helped troubleshoot a rendering issue on the Philadelphia project, smiled at Richard in the hallways, had lunch with Marcus, who wanted advice on running the company, and talked about his vision for expansion with the earnest enthusiasm of someone who'd never actually built anything. "I want to take us international," he said over sushi that he'd ordered to the executive dining room. "London, Dubai, Singapore. Really make Castellano a global brand." "That's ambitious," I said. "Dad thinks I should wait, learn the domestic business first. But I think we need to be bold, strike while we're hot." I nodded, took notes, offered suggestions, played the role of loyal advisor, helpful CTO, grateful son-in-law. And the whole time, I was thinking about dependencies, about critical points, about the architecture of destruction. The beautiful thing about complex systems is that they fail in complex ways. When something goes wrong, there are always multiple possible causes, multiple places to look, multiple experts who can offer theories. The more sophisticated the system, the harder it is to determine exactly what broke and why. And Prometheus was very, very sophisticated. I started with something small, a configuration change to one of the rendering servers, subtle enough that it wouldn't cause immediate failure but would slow processing times by about 15%. Not enough to stop work, just enough to be annoying. The kind of degradation that happens naturally as systems age, as load increases, as optimization routines become less effective. IT noticed and compensated, allocated more resources, and things returned to normal. Then I introduced a small bug into the material pricing API, not in my code, but in how it interfaced with the supplier databases. Prices would sometimes lag by a few hours, forcing estimators to double-check manually. Again, annoying, but not catastrophic. The kind of thing that happens with third-party services. IT logged tickets, reached out to the supposed vendor, got back messages saying they were looking into it. The messages came from me, of course, from email addresses I'd set up years ago when I was building these systems, when I was the vendor. Each small failure created more work, more manual processes, more time spent on tasks that Prometheus was supposed to automate. Projects started taking slightly longer. Estimates became less reliable. Clients began asking questions. And through it all, I was the helpful CTO, working late to troubleshoot, offering theories, implementing fixes that worked temporarily before the next small failure emerged. "It's like playing whack-a-mole," the head of IT complained during a meeting. "We fix one thing, another pops up. It's like the system is degrading." "All software degrades over time," I said reasonably, "especially systems this complex. We might need to consider a major overhaul, refactor some of the core architecture." Richard looked concerned. "How long would that take?" "Months," I said. "Maybe a year. We'd need to carefully migrate everything, retrain staff, test extensively." "We don't have a year," Marcus said. He'd started attending executive meetings, sitting at Richard's right hand, trying to project authority. "We have the Singapore pitch in 3 months. We need the systems working perfectly. Then we'll keep patching," I said. "Keep things running as best we can." "Can't we just hire more programmers?" Marcus asked. "Like a whole team to fix this?" I smiled. "Of course, but they'd need to understand the codebase first. I'd estimate 6 months just for onboarding, learning the systems, understanding how everything interconnects." "So we're dependent on you," Richard said, and there was something in his voice I couldn't quite read. "You're dependent on Prometheus," I corrected. "I'm just the person who knows it best." The meeting ended, and I went back to my office and made another small change. Reduced the timeout threshold on one of the collaboration servers by 30 seconds. A tiny adjustment, invisible to users, but one that would cause intermittent connection failures during peak usage hours. Death by 1,000 cuts. The beautiful thing about revenge, the thing that makes it elegant instead of crude, is patience. The willingness to wait, to let each small action compound, to build towards something inevitable. I was patient. I had time, and I had all the keys. 3 weeks after Marcus's birthday party, Castellano Design and Architecture lost its first major client since I'd implemented Prometheus. The Riverside Tower project, a 40-story mixed-use development in downtown Boston that represented 18 months of work and a projected $89 million in fees. They'd been patient through the first delays, understanding when the revised renderings came in 2 weeks late instead of the usual 48 hours. They'd even absorbed the cost overruns when our estimates came in 15% below actual material prices, forcing a budget revision that made them look incompetent to their investors. But when we missed the final planning commission deadline because the structural engineering calculations failed to process overnight, a critical submission that couldn't be late, that had been scheduled months in advance, their patience ran out. Richard took the call in his office with the door closed, but the entire executive floor could hear him shouting, not words, just the tone, that particular frequency of rage mixed with desperation that comes from watching something valuable slip away. I was in my office 3 doors down, ostensibly debugging the calculation failure when he stormed in without knocking. What the hell happened? I looked up from my screens, careful to arrange my face into appropriate concern. The engineering servers crashed around 2 a.m. By the time the automated systems tried to restart them, we'd missed the processing window. Why did they crash? I'm still investigating. Could be a memory leak. Could be a corrupted data set. Could be infrastructure issues with the cloud provider. I gestured at my monitors, covered in logs and error messages that looked damning, but were actually just the normal noise of complex systems. It's hard to say definitively. Hard to say? Richard's face was red, a vein pulsing in his temple. We just lost an $89 million contract because of a crash. And you're telling me it's hard to say why? Complex systems fail in complex ways, I said, echoing what I'd told him a dozen times over the past weeks. Prometheus processes millions of calculations across dozens of interconnected services. Any one of them could be the root cause. Then fix it. I'm trying. But Richard, this is what I've been warning about. The system is under strain. We've scaled up so fast, taken on so many projects, that we're pushing the architecture beyond what it was designed to handle. You designed it to handle this. I designed it to handle the company as it existed 3 years ago, I said calmly. We've tripled in size since then. We need a major infrastructure overhaul, proper load balancing, redundant systems, professional DevOps support. I've been saying this for weeks. He stared at me, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing the cost of the overhaul against the cost of continued failures, trying to figure out if I was incompetent, if I'd built something fundamentally flawed, or if this was just the inevitable growing pain of success. How much? He asked finally. For a proper overhaul? 5 million, maybe 6, plus another 2 million annually for maintenance and support staff. His jaw tightened. That's insane. That's what enterprise-level infrastructure costs. We've been running on a startup budget with Fortune 500 expectations. I paused, let the words sink in. You could also bring in an outside consulting firm to assess the situation, get a second opinion. I knew he wouldn't. Bringing in outsiders meant admitting there was a problem, meant exposing the company's technical infrastructure to scrutiny, meant risk. Richard had built his empire on control, on keeping everything in-house, on trusting family and loyal employees. Just fix it, he said. Do whatever you need to do, but we can't lose another client. He left, and I sat there in the silence of my office, feeling nothing. Not satisfaction, not guilt, not even the bitter pleasure of watching him squirm. Just a kind of hollow determination. The same feeling I'd had during finals week at MIT when I'd been running on coffee and spite. When failure wasn't an option because failure meant losing my scholarship, meant losing everything. The difference was that back then, I'd been fighting to build something. Now I was fighting to destroy it. The memory leak I'd mentioned was real. I'd introduced it myself. A small inefficiency in how the engineering servers handled memory allocation. Not enough to cause immediate problems, but enough that after 16 hours of continuous processing, the servers would run out of resources and crash. And they always processed overnight, when the most complex calculations ran, when IT wasn't actively monitoring. It was elegant, really. A time bomb that reset itself every day, that looked like a bug instead of sabotage, that could be fixed temporarily, before emerging again in a slightly different form. I'd learned something important during those 3 weeks of systematic degradation. Destruction required the same skills as creation, the same attention to detail, the same deep understanding of how systems worked, the same ability to see second and third order effects. The only difference was intention, and I'd always been very good at seeing the whole picture. Elena stopped talking to me about work after the Riverside contract fell through. Not overtly, we still had dinner together, still slept in the same bed, still maintained the appearance of a functional marriage. But there was a carefulness to her now, a distance that manifested in the topics she avoided, the questions she didn't ask, the way she'd changed the subject when I mentioned the office. Her mother had started inviting her to lunch more often. Tuesday afternoons at the country club, just the two of them, and Elena would come home with that particular set to her shoulders that meant they'd been talking about me. "Mom thinks you're stressed," she said one evening, arranging takeout containers on our dining room table. Thai food from the place near her office, expensive enough that the containers were actual ceramic that we'd have to return. "I am stressed," I said. "The company is falling apart. She thinks maybe you're overwhelmed, that maybe the CTO position is too much responsibility." I looked up from my pad thai. "She thinks I'm incompetent." She didn't say that. She didn't have to. Elena sighed, set down her fork. "Everyone's worried, okay? Dad's worried, Mom's worried, even Marcus is worried. The system you built is breaking down, and you can't seem to fix it. And people are starting to ask questions." "What kind of questions?" "Like whether maybe it's not as robust as everyone thought. Like whether maybe we got lucky for a couple years and now we're seeing the real limitations. Like whether..." She stopped, bit her lip. "Whether what?" "Like whether you actually knew what you were doing, or if you just stumbled onto something that worked temporarily." There it was. The question I'd been waiting for, the doubt that I'd been carefully cultivating. Because that was the genius of good revenge. You didn't have to convince people you were sabotaging them. You just had to make them doubt you'd ever been competent in the first place. "Is that what you think?" I asked. "I don't know what to think," she said, and she sounded tired. "I know you're brilliant. I've always known that. But I also know that you've been different since Marcus's party. Distant, obsessed, working all hours but nothing's getting better. Because the problems are complex. Or because you're hurt and angry, and maybe not trying as hard as you could be." The accusation hung between us, sharp and ugly. She'd said it, finally vocalized what her family had been whispering, what they'd been too polite or too afraid to say directly. "You think I'm sabotaging my own work?" "I think you're human," she said. "I think you feel unappreciated, and maybe you're not as motivated to kill yourself fixing every little problem that comes up." "Every little problem?" "Elena, we lost an $89 million contract, and you're the only one who can prevent that from happening again, apparently. The only one who understands the systems, the only one who can fix things, the only one who matters." Her voice had an edge now, frustration bleeding through. "Do you know how that sounds? Like you're making yourself indispensable so we can't function without you." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "That's exactly what I did. That's what you asked me to do 3 years ago when your father was going bankrupt. Make yourself indispensable. Save the company. Save the family. I asked you to help, not to build some kind of digital kingdom that only you control. I built what I had to build to save you." "To save us? Or to prove something?" She stood up, started pacing. "Because sometimes I wonder if this was ever really about the company, or if it was about showing my father that you were good enough, smart enough, worthy enough to be part of this family." The words hit like a physical blow, precise and devastating. Because they were true, partially true. True enough that I couldn't deny them without lying. And maybe you proved it for a while, she continued. Maybe you were the golden boy, the savior, the genius son-in-law. But then Dad gave the company to Marcus. And suddenly you weren't special anymore, and now everything's falling apart. You think this is about ego? I think this is about you feeling unappreciated and acting like a child because you didn't get what you wanted. I stood up slowly, carefully, because I was afraid of what I might do if I moved too fast. Not violence. I'd never been violent, never even raised my hand in anger, but something worse. The kind of truth-telling that destroys marriages, that burns bridges, that can't be taken back. What I wanted, I said quietly, was basic recognition for rebuilding your family's company from scratch. What I wanted was partnership, equity, a stake in what I created. What I got was a $100 bill and a lecture about knowing my place. That's not fair. Your father told me I was worth $100, Elena, in front of half the city's business elite. And you think the problem is that I'm hurt and unmotivated? He shouldn't have done that, she said, and at least she had the grace to look uncomfortable. I've told him that, but that doesn't give you the right to let the company fail. I'm not letting it fail. I'm watching it fail, because it's built on systems that only I understand. Systems that are now breaking down because they're being pushed beyond their capacity. That's not sabotage. That's reality. Then train someone else. Bring in help. Stop being the only person who can keep this whole thing running. I've tried. Your father won't authorize the budget for a proper infrastructure team. He thinks I'm exaggerating the problem. Are you? The question was soft, but it carried weight. She was asking me directly, wife to husband, looking in my eyes like she could see the truth if she just looked hard enough. I could tell her, could confess everything, explain the dependencies and the authentication systems and the slow, systematic degradation I'd been orchestrating. Could make her understand that this wasn't pettiness or incompetence, but justice, the natural consequence of treating people as disposable. But looking at her face, at the doubt there, at the way she'd already started pulling away from me, already started believing her family's version of events, I realized it wouldn't matter. She'd made her choice the night she'd suggested I'd misunderstood her father's insult. Had made it every time she'd asked me to just be grateful, to just accept my place, to just stop making things difficult. No, I said. I'm not exaggerating. The system is breaking down because it was never designed to scale this far, this fast. And unless your father authorizes a major overhaul, it's going to keep getting worse. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you. But she didn't. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she'd already turned partially away from me, in the set of her shoulders that meant she was protecting herself from disappointment. I should get back to work, I said. It's almost 9. There's a lot to fix. I left her there in our dining room, surrounded by expensive takeout that neither of us would finish, and went back to my office, pulled up Prometheus's architecture on my screens, and stared at it like an artist studying their work in progress. The next degradation was already planned. A modification to the API that handled client data synchronization. Nothing that would corrupt data or lose information. Just a subtle change that would cause sync conflicts during multi-user sessions. Architects and engineers would find themselves working on slightly different versions of the same files, creating discrepancies that would need to be manually reconciled. Another cut. Another small wound that would bleed efficiency, bleed confidence, bleed the reputation that Richard had spent 3 years rebuilding. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Can we talk? Got some ideas about the tech problems. I stared at the message, at the casual confidence of someone who'd been given an empire and thought he could fix it with ideas. 16 years old, never built anything, never struggled for anything. And he had ideas about problems he didn't even understand. I typed back, sure, tomorrow afternoon? Perfect. I think I might have a solution. I almost laughed. A solution. As if solutions were simple things, easily found, like answers in the back of a textbook. As if the problems were accidents instead of architecture, bugs instead of design. But I said, looking forward to it. Because that was the other thing about revenge. About the elegant kind that played out slowly. You had to maintain appearances. Had to smile and nod and pretend that everything was normal while the foundation crumbled beneath everyone's feet. The office was quiet at 9:30. Most people had gone home, back to families and lives that didn't revolve around code and systems and the careful dismantling of digital empires. I could hear the cleaning crew down the hall, the soft hum of vacuums, and the occasional laugh of people who had simple jobs with simple problems. I pulled up the API documentation, started writing the modification that would cause the synchronization conflicts. The code was elegant, efficient, nearly identical to the original, except for a few key lines that changed how version conflicts were resolved, or rather, how they weren't resolved. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the muscle memory of 1,000 late nights, 10,000 hours of practice, the accumulated expertise of someone who taught themselves to code because they couldn't afford not to be excellent. Somewhere in the building, Richard was probably still in his office too, staring at spreadsheets and client lists and trying to figure out how to prevent the next disaster. Somewhere in the city, Elena was probably on the phone with her mother, discussing her difficult husband who couldn't just be grateful, couldn't just accept his place, couldn't just make things work. And somewhere in the future, weeks or months from now, I couldn't say exactly when Castellano Design and Architecture was going to face a choice. Either authorize the multi-million-dollar overhaul that I'd requested, giving me back the leverage I'd lost when Richard handed Marcus the company, or continue bleeding clients and reputation until the whole thing collapsed. Either way, I'd prove my value. Either way, they'd know exactly what I was worth, and it was a hell of a lot more than $100. I finished the modification, tested it in isolation, confirmed it would do exactly what I intended. Then I deployed it to the production servers, watching the update propagate across the system like a virus, invisible and patient, and waiting for the right conditions to activate. Tomorrow, when architects and engineers started their work, they wouldn't notice anything wrong immediately. The problems would emerge gradually. A discrepancy here, a conflict there, small enough to be annoying, but not alarming. Until they added up, until the pattern became clear. Until everyone realized that Prometheus wasn't just degrading, it was dying, and there was only one person who could save it. I shut down my workstation, gathered my things, and headed for the parking garage. The building was nearly empty now, just security guards and cleaning crews, and the occasional light burning in an executive office where someone was working late, fighting fires, trying to hold together an empire that was slowly coming apart. The autumn air was cold when I stepped outside, sharp and clear in that way that makes everything feel more real, more vivid. I could see my breath, see the stars above the city lights, see the shape of my future stretching out ahead of me like a path through darkness. I'd been afraid, initially, that destroying what I'd built would hurt, that it would feel like killing a child, like burning down a house I'd constructed with my own hands. But it didn't hurt. It felt like mathematics, like engineering, like the precise application of force to critical structural points, exactly calibrated, exactly timed. It felt like justice. And I was just getting started. Marcus arrived at my office at 2 p.m. sharp, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He'd started dressing like an executive since the company transfer, trading his prep school blazers for 3-piece Tom Ford numbers that made him look like he was playing dress-up in his father's closet. Which, in a way, he was. "Thanks for making time," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to ask for anything twice. "Of course, you said you had ideas about the technical problems." He pulled out an iPad, swiped through a few screens. "I've been doing research. Talked to some guys at school whose dads run tech companies, and I think I know what the issue is." I leaned back in my chair, forced my face into an expression of interested receptiveness. "I'm listening." "We're using too many different systems," he said, with the certainty of someone who'd just discovered gravity. "All these cloud services and APIs and third-party vendors, it's too complicated. We should consolidate everything into one platform. Microsoft has this enterprise suite, Azure, that can do everything Prometheus does, but it's all integrated, all supported by a major corporation." I nodded slowly. "That's an interesting thought, right? And the best part is, Microsoft has entire teams dedicated to support. If something breaks, We call them, they fix it. We wouldn't be dependent on any one person understanding the whole system. The implication hung between us, polite but unmistakable. We wouldn't be dependent on you. The migration would be complex, I said. We're talking about moving 2 million lines of custom code, 3 years of project data, proprietary algorithms that are specifically optimized for architectural design. Microsoft's tools are generic. They're built for general enterprise use, not specialized applications. But they work, right? I mean, huge companies use Azure. If it's good enough for them, it should be good enough for us. It was the logic of someone who'd never built anything, who thought software was interchangeable, who believed that complexity could be solved by throwing money at brand names. The logic of someone who'd been given a company without understanding what made it valuable. Azure is powerful, I said carefully. But Prometheus isn't just a collection of tools. It's an ecosystem designed specifically for how Castellano operates. The rendering engines are calibrated to your architect's workflow. The estimation algorithms incorporate historical data from hundreds of your projects. The collaboration tools are built around your project management methodology. You can't just swap that out for generic enterprise software. Why not? Because you'd lose everything that makes you competitive. The speed, the accuracy, the integration, all of that comes from custom optimization. Azure would give you maybe 60% of Prometheus's functionality, and that remaining 40% is what separates you from your competitors. Marcus frowned, swiped through his iPad again. The guys I talked to said migration usually takes like 6 months. We could have it done by summer. The guys you talked to, what kind of systems were they migrating? I don't know. Business stuff. Email, databases, that kind of thing. Email and databases are standardized technologies. What we've built here is custom from the ground up. Migration would take 18 months minimum, probably 2 years. And it would cost anywhere from $15 to $20 million. His face fell. That much? At minimum. And during the migration, you'd be running parallel systems, the old Prometheus and the new Azure platform, which means double the maintenance burden, double the training, and significant risk of data inconsistencies. But after the migration, you'd have a generic platform that does less than what you have now, costs more to maintain, and provides no competitive advantage. I paused. Let that sink in. Marcus, I appreciate you thinking about solutions, but some problems can't be solved by switching vendors. Sometimes, you have to fix what you've built. He was quiet for a moment, processing. I could see the frustration in his face, the collision between his 16-year-old certainty that problems had simple solutions, and the uncomfortable reality that owning a company meant dealing with complexity. Dad thinks you're not trying hard enough, he said finally. There it was, the real reason for this meeting. Not to share ideas, but to deliver a message that Richard was too careful to say directly. Your dad thinks a lot of things, I said. But the reality is that Prometheus is a complex system under significant strain. Fixing it requires time, resources, and expertise. I've been requesting budget for infrastructure improvements for weeks. He keeps saying no, because you're asking for millions of dollars. Because that's what it costs to properly maintain enterprise-level systems. You can't run a $300 million company on a startup budget. Marcus stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. I'll talk to Dad. Maybe we can find a middle ground. I appreciate that. He hesitated at the door, looking younger than 16. Looking like a kid who'd been given a prize he didn't know how to hold. Can I ask you something? Off the record? Sure. Do you regret it? Building all this? The question caught me off guard. Not because I hadn't asked it myself, I'd asked it every night for the past month, staring at code while my marriage dissolved around me, but because I hadn't expected it from him. Why do you ask? Because you seem miserable, he said simply. Like, everyone talks about how brilliant you are, how you saved the company, but you never look happy. And now everything's breaking and you're the only one who can fix it, and that seems like a pretty shitty position to be in. I almost laughed. In his clumsy teenage way, Marcus had articulated exactly what I'd been feeling. The isolation, the burden, The poisonous knowledge that I'd made myself simultaneously indispensable and disposable. Building things is always complicated, I said. The work itself is pure. You're solving problems, creating solutions, making something that didn't exist before. But the politics around it, the credit, the ownership, the question of who benefits from what you create, that's where it gets messy. Is that why everything's breaking? Because you're mad about the politics? He'd asked it directly, without the careful phrasing his father or Elena would use, just straight to the accusation, the suspicion that everyone had been dancing around. Everything's breaking because complex systems fail in complex ways, I said. And because your father won't invest in the infrastructure needed to prevent those failures, that's not politics, that's just reality. Marcus nodded, not entirely convinced, but willing to accept the answer. For what it's worth, I think you should have gotten more credit. Like everyone knows Dad didn't do this alone. But he's weird about legacy stuff, about keeping it in the family. I married into the family. Yeah, but that's not the same as being born into it. Not to him. He shrugged, uncomfortable. Anyway, I should go. Thanks for hearing me out about the Azure thing. Anytime. He left, and I sat there in the silence of my office, thinking about what he'd said. Not the Azure proposal, which was naive and unworkable, but the other part. The question about regret. Did I regret building Prometheus? 3 years ago, the answer would have been an immediate, emphatic no. Building it had been the most fulfilling work of my life, pure problem solving, the kind of deep technical challenge that made you forget to eat or sleep because you were so absorbed in the solution. And it had worked. Had saved the company, saved Elena's family, proven that I was more than some scholarship kid who'd gotten lucky marrying up. But now I'd built something beautiful and watched other people claim it, had created value, and been told I was worth $100, had made myself indispensable and discovered that indispensability without ownership was just another form of servitude. My phone buzzed. An alert from the monitoring systems, the synchronization conflicts I'd introduced yesterday were starting to manifest. 3 different project teams reporting discrepancies, confusion. The first whispers of panic as people realized they might be working on different versions of the same files. I pulled up the error logs, scanned through them with the practiced eye of someone who knew exactly what they'd find. The conflicts were escalating faster than I'd anticipated. Apparently, the Boston and Philadelphia teams had been collaborating heavily this morning, multiplying the sync issues exponentially. Good. I drafted an email to IT, CCing Richard and Marcus, explaining that we were experiencing unexpected synchronization issues with the collaboration platform and that I was investigating the root cause. Recommended that teams avoid multi-user editing until the issue was resolved. The response from Richard came within minutes. How long to fix? I waited 10 minutes before replying. Let him stew in the uncertainty. Then, difficult to say. The sync protocols are complex. Could be hours, could be days. Recommend we schedule an emergency meeting tomorrow to discuss short-term workarounds and long-term infrastructure needs. Another minute passed. Then, fine, 8 a.m., conference room A. I smiled at the screen. He was scared now, really scared. Not just about losing another client, but about losing control. About having to admit that the empire he'd rebuilt was held together by systems he didn't understand, maintained by someone he'd insulted and undervalued. The fear was good. Fear made people desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for the meeting, building a presentation that would walk them through the technical challenges in language they could understand. Not dumbed down, Richard hated being patronized but translated. Metaphors about buildings and infrastructure, about foundation problems and load-bearing walls, about the difference between cosmetic fixes and structural repairs. I was good at metaphors. Had learned to speak the language of non-technical executives during my MIT years, when I'd had to explain my research to potential investors, to grant committees, to professors who understood theory but not implementation. The presentation was a masterpiece of controlled information, It showed the problems clearly, the degradation, the failures, the risks, without revealing the underlying architecture that made me the single point of failure. It presented solutions that all required significant investment and my continued involvement. It framed the choice perfectly: either commit to fixing Prometheus properly or watch it continue to deteriorate. It didn't leave room for options like bring in outside consultants or replace the CTO, because those options would require time and transparency, and right now the company was bleeding too badly to afford either. Elena found me in my office at 7, after most of the staff had gone home. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Marcus said you two talked." "We did. He had some ideas about Azure migration. He said you shot him down pretty definitively." I explained why it wouldn't work. "There's a difference." She came in, closed the door behind her. "Dad's really stressed. The Philadelphia team just reported that they lost half a day's work because of sync issues. The client is threatening to walk." "I know. I sent the alert." "Can you fix it?" "Eventually." That's not what I asked. I really looked at her, for the first time in days. She was wearing her work clothes, the sharp blazer and tailored pants that she wore to the foundation where she volunteered, planning charity events and fundraising galas. Her hair was pulled back, and there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She looked tired. We both did. "The question isn't whether I can fix it," I said. "The question is whether your father is willing to invest in the infrastructure needed to prevent it from breaking again." "He thinks you're holding the company hostage." "He thinks that because he doesn't understand the technical reality. Or he does understand and doesn't want to pay for it." "Are you," she asked quietly, "holding us hostage?" It was the most direct she'd been since this whole thing started. No careful phrasing, no diplomatic language, just the raw question underneath everything. I could lie, could give her the answer she wanted to hear, the one that would smooth things over, that would let us go back to pretending our marriage wasn't fracturing along fault lines of loyalty and class and fundamental disagreement about what I deserved. But I was tired of lying, tired of smiling and nodding and playing the grateful son-in-law who was just so thankful to be included. "I'm doing my job," I said. "I'm maintaining systems that your father won't invest in properly. I'm fixing problems that are the natural consequence of scaling too fast without adequate infrastructure. If that feels like hostage-taking, maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you've finally realized how dependent you are on someone you took for granted." Her jaw tightened. "We didn't take you for granted. Your father gave me $100 and told me that was my value, and I told you that was wrong. I talked to him about it. He said he lost his temper, that you were being demanding. I asked for equity in what I built. That's not demanding. That's basic fairness. You married into this family knowing how it worked, knowing that Dad built this company, that it's his legacy, that he gets to decide what happens to it. I married you," I said. "I didn't marry the company. And I saved it anyway because I loved you and wanted your family to be okay. But apparently, saving someone's entire livelihood doesn't earn you a seat at the table. It earns you a $100 bill and lectures about gratitude." She flinched. "You can't keep throwing that in my face." "Why not? It's the truth. It's the moment when I realized exactly what I was to your family. A useful tool. A hired hand who should be grateful for the privilege of serving the Castellanos. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Elena. That's the point. I built something extraordinary, saved your family from bankruptcy, and got told I was worth $100. And now that the thing I built is breaking, suddenly everyone's very interested in what I think, what I need, how to keep me happy. But it's not because you value me. It's because you need me." She was quiet for a long moment, and I watched emotions play across her face. Anger, hurt, frustration, something that might have been guilt. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "Really, not the technical stuff, not the budget requests. What do you want from us?" It was a fair question. Maybe the only fair question she'd asked in weeks. "I want recognition that I earned my place here. Not through marriage, not through luck, but through the work I did. I want partnership, equity, a stake in what I created. I want your father to look at me and see someone who built value, not someone who got lucky marrying his daughter. And if he can't give you that, then I guess we'll find out how long Castellano Design can survive without Prometheus working properly. She stared at me, and I saw the moment when she made her decision. Not consciously, maybe, but I saw it happen, saw her pull back, protect herself, choose her family of origin over the family we'd tried to build together. I have to go, she said. Mom's expecting me for dinner. Of course she is. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've had dinner with your mother 4 times this week, and we haven't had a real conversation in a month. Maybe I don't like the conversations we have anymore, she said, and there was real pain in her voice. Maybe I don't like what you're becoming. What am I becoming? Bitter, vindictive, someone who's willing to let everything burn because you didn't get what you wanted. I laughed, harsh and ugly. I'm not letting anything burn. I'm watching the natural consequences of your father's decisions play out. That's different. Is it? She didn't wait for an answer, just turned and left, closing the door quietly behind her, and I sat there in the silence, wondering when exactly we'd pass the point of no return, when this had stopped being about fixing problems and started being about proving points, when love had become subordinate to loyalty, and loyalty had become a question of blood versus choice. My phone buzzed. Another alert, this time from the rendering servers. The memory leak I'd introduced was manifesting earlier than expected, probably because the Philadelphia team was trying to catch up on their lost work, pushing the system harder than usual. I pulled up the diagnostics, watched the memory usage climbing steadily toward critical levels. Another few hours and the servers would crash, taking down all the rendering work happening across the company's active projects. I could fix it. A few keystrokes, a patch deployed, problem solved. Or I could let it crash. Add another data point to tomorrow's presentation. Another piece of evidence that Prometheus was dying, and that only I could save it. My finger hovered over the keyboard. Dr. Cardenas would appreciate the metaphor. The engineer at the critical point, deciding how much force to apply, whether to shore up the structure or let it fall. I thought about Elena, about the way she'd looked at me before she left. Not with hate, that would have been easier, but with disappointment, with the kind of sad resignation that comes from watching someone you loved become someone you don't recognize. I thought about Marcus, asking if I regretted building Prometheus. About Richard, scared and angry, and still too proud to admit he needed me. About 3 years of work, of late nights and sacrifices, and the burning certainty that I was creating something that mattered. And then I thought about that $100 bill, still in my wallet, still crisp and perfect and insulting. I closed the diagnostics panel without deploying the fix. Tomorrow, when the servers crashed, Richard would panic, would beg me to fix it, to save them, to do whatever it took to keep the company running. And I would. But first, we were going to talk about what I was actually worth. And it was a hell of a lot more than $100. The rendering servers crashed at 11:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I was still in my office, watching the memory usage climb on my monitors like a slow-motion car accident. Watched it hit 80%, 90, 95. Watched the system logs start throwing warnings, then errors, then nothing at all as the servers seized up and died. The automated alerts went out immediately. Text messages to the IT team, emails to department heads, a flashing red indicator on the company dashboard that everyone with executive access could see. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing. The IT director, panicked. The head of architecture, furious, because his team had been in the middle of a critical rendering for a client presentation. Richard, not even bothering with a message, just calling over and over until I finally answered. "What the hell is happening?" he demanded. The rendering servers crashed. Memory overflow, probably from the memory leak I mentioned last week. "Can you fix it?" "Not tonight. The servers need to be completely restarted, and the memory leak needs to be patched before we bring them back online. Otherwise, they'll just crash again." How long? Few hours to diagnose properly. Maybe another 4 to 6 to implement a fix. We're looking at tomorrow afternoon at the earliest." The silence on the other end was thick with barely controlled rage. "We have the Henderson presentation in the morning. They're expecting full 3D renderings of the proposed tower. Maybe R1. When is today? Maybe R1. Maybe R1. I know. We'll have to postpone. We can't postpone. They're meeting with 3 other firms this week. If we don't present tomorrow, we're out. Then we present without the renderings. Use the 2D plans. Talk through the concept. They specifically asked for renderings. That's the whole point of the meeting. That's what separates us from the other firms. Our ability to show them exactly what they're getting." I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes. I could fix it tonight. Could work through the small hours, patch the leak, restart the servers, have everything running by dawn. I'd done it before, dozens of times, burning midnight oil to save projects and deadlines and the company's reputation. But this time, I didn't want to. "I'm sorry, Richard. The system crashed. I'll fix it as fast as I can, but I can't do miracles." "You built this goddamn thing. You should be able to keep it running." "I built it 3 years ago on a shoestring budget to save a dying company. Since then, we've tripled our workload without investing in infrastructure. This isn't a failure of design. It's a failure of investment." Another long silence. Then, tomorrow, 8 a.m., conference room. We're having this conversation with everyone present. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there in the darkness of my office, surrounded by the glow of monitors showing systems in distress, and felt something that might have been satisfaction or might have been guilt. It was hard to tell anymore. The line between justice and revenge had blurred somewhere over the past few weeks, and I'd stopped trying to distinguish them. My phone buzzed again. A text from Elena. "Dad called, said servers are down. Are you coming home tonight?" I stared at the message. Not, "Are you okay?" or "Do you need help?" Just the practical question about my schedule, as if I were a contractor being asked about project timelines. I typed back, "Probably not. Lots to do." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, okay. That was it. No argument. No concern. No attempt to bridge the growing distance between us. Just acceptance that we'd become 2 people living parallel lives, occasionally intersecting but no longer truly connected. I spent the night in my office, not sleeping, but not working either. Just sitting, thinking, running through scenarios. The meeting tomorrow would be the inflection point. Richard would either commit to the infrastructure investment I'd been requesting, or he'd try to find another solution. Try to bring in outside consultants, try to replace me, try to solve the problem without admitting that I held all the cards. And if he chose wrong, if he tried to outmaneuver me rather than compensate me fairly, then I'd show him exactly how deep the dependency went, how thoroughly I'd embedded myself into every critical system, how impossible it would be to untangle Prometheus without my cooperation. The thought should have brought satisfaction, should have felt like power, like leverage, like the beginning of getting what I deserved. Instead, it felt hollow, because even if I won, even if I forced Richard to give me equity and recognition and everything I'd earned, I'd still lose. Would still be the son-in-law who'd held the company hostage, who'd leveraged his technical knowledge for personal gain, who'd proven himself to be exactly the mercenary outsider they'd always suspected I was. There was no winning this. Not really. Just different flavors of defeat. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the office windows, painting everything in shades of exhaustion. I showered in the executive bathroom, changed into the spare suit I kept in my office for emergencies, made myself look presentable, professional, like someone who'd spent the night heroically trying to save failing systems, not someone who'd deliberately let them fall. The conference room was already full when I arrived at 7:55. Richard at the head of the table, Marcus beside him looking uncomfortable in another expensive suit, Elena next to her mother Margaret, and the sight of her sitting on their side of the table, literally, physically on their side, hit me harder than it should have. The IT director, the CFO, the head of architecture, and 2 people I didn't recognize, wearing suits that screamed management consultants. So, that's how it was going to be. "Thank you for coming," Richard said. his voice carrying that particular tone of controlled anger that he reserved for serious situations. I think everyone knows why we're here. Our technical systems, which we've relied on for 3 years, are falling apart. We've lost clients, missed deadlines, and as of last night, we can't even generate the basic renderings that our business model depends on. He looked at me. I've asked 2 consultants from Blackstone Technical to join us. They specialize in enterprise software audits. I want to understand what's happening with Prometheus and what our options are. I nodded slowly, sat down across from the consultants. They were young, probably late 20s, carrying themselves with that particular confidence that comes from working for prestigious firms. The woman had her laptop open, already taking notes. The man was studying me with analytical interest. Before we start, I said, I prepared a presentation walking through the technical challenges we've been facing. I pulled out my laptop, connected to the conference room display. I think it will help frame the discussion. We've seen enough presentations, Richard said. I want solutions, not explanations. With respect, you can't have solutions without understanding the problem. The male consultant, his name tag said David Chen, leaned forward. I think a technical overview would be helpful. We've reviewed the documentation you provided, but hearing it directly from the primary architect would give us context. Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine, keep it brief. I pulled up my presentation, 30 slides, carefully crafted to tell a story. Started with Prometheus's architecture, the distributed systems, the cloud services, the interconnected dependencies that made it powerful but complex. Showed the growth curve of the company's workload over 3 years. Highlighted the infrastructure requests I'd made and that had been denied. Then I showed the failures, a timeline of degradation, each incident marked and explained. The Riverside Tower deadline missed due to calculation errors. The Henderson rendering failure from last night. The synchronization conflicts plaguing multiple teams. Each one color-coded, categorized, traced back to its root cause. The pattern is clear, I said, advancing to a slide that showed projected failure rates. Prometheus is operating beyond its designed capacity. Without significant infrastructure investment, these failures will increase in frequency and severity. How much investment are we talking about? The CFO asked. 5 to 6 million for a comprehensive overhaul. Another 2 million annually for maintenance and dedicated support staff. Margaret gasped. Marcus looked shocked. Richard's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands clench under the table. The female consultant, Sarah Kim, according to her tag, raised her hand. What about alternative solutions? Migration to established enterprise platforms. Bringing in additional development talent to share the workload? I've evaluated those options, I said. Migration would take 18 to 24 months and cost 15 to 20 million, with significant functionality loss. As for additional talent, the learning curve for Prometheus is steep. We're looking at 6 to 8 months before any new developer could contribute meaningfully. That seems excessive, David said. Most complex codebases can be onboarded within a few months. Most complex codebases are built on standard frameworks with comprehensive documentation. Prometheus is custom-built, highly optimized, with proprietary algorithms that aren't documented anywhere except in the code itself. Why isn't it documented? Sarah asked. Good question. The kind of question that someone with experience would ask, that would expose exactly how much of Prometheus existed solely in my head. Time constraints. I said smoothly. When I built this, the company was months from bankruptcy. Speed was more important than documentation. I was the only developer, and documenting for myself seemed redundant. So the entire system is dependent on your knowledge, David said. Practically speaking, yes. Richard finally spoke, his voice tight. Which brings us to the real issue. We have a business-critical system that only one person understands, and that person is asking for millions of dollars to fix problems that keep getting worse despite his best efforts. The accusation hung in the air, polite but unmistakable. Elena looked down at her hands. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Are you suggesting I'm causing these problems intentionally? I asked quietly. I'm suggesting that the problems are convenient. They give you leverage, make you indispensable, justify the compensation and recognition you've been demanding. I've been requesting, not demanding, and the problems aren't convenient, they're inevitable. This is what happens when you scale a system beyond its design parameters without proper investment. Or it's what happens when someone wants to prove a point, Margaret said softly. All eyes turned to her. She rarely spoke in business meetings, preferred to operate through influence and suggestion rather than direct confrontation. My husband gave you a job, a salary, a place in this family. And when that wasn't enough, when you wanted more, suddenly everything started falling apart. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mrs. Castellano, I said, keeping my voice level, with respect, the timing isn't suspicious. It's logical. Prometheus worked perfectly when the company was smaller. As we scaled, as my son was given control of the company, she interrupted. That's when things started breaking. Right after Marcus's birthday. Right after you didn't get what you wanted. I looked at Elena, silently asking her to say something, to defend me, to point out the absurdity of the accusation. But she was still staring at her hands, her face carefully neutral. The degradation started before Marcus's birthday, I said. Check the logs. The first failures appeared 6 weeks before the party. The timing just coincided with us hitting critical scale. Can you prove that? David asked. The logs are in the system. Anyone can review them. Logs that you control, Sarah said, that run on systems only you have full access to. And there it was, the trap closing. Because they were right, I did control the logs, did have root access to everything, could theoretically manipulate any evidence I presented. The dependency I'd created, the architecture that gave me leverage, also made any defense I offered suspect. Richard leaned forward. Here's what I think is happening. I think you built something valuable, and you're angry that you don't own it. So you're letting it break, maybe actively breaking it to force us into giving you what you want. And I think that's extortion. The word landed like a bomb. Extortion, not just ungrateful or demanding or difficult, but criminal. An accusation that could destroy careers, end marriages, justify any action they decided to take. That's a serious accusation, I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Do you have any evidence? We have a system that worked perfectly for 2 years suddenly falling apart after you were denied equity. We have problems that only you can fix, that always seem to justify the exact investments you've been requesting. We have your own admission that you're the single point of failure for our entire technical infrastructure. Richard's voice was rising now. 3 years of frustration bleeding through. And we have consultants here who are going to review everything, audit every line of code, examine every system, and find out exactly what's happening. I looked at David and Sarah. They were watching me carefully, probably trying to decide if I was a saboteur or just an arrogant developer who'd built a fragile system. An audit is fine, I said. I have nothing to hide. But I should warn you, Prometheus is complex. A comprehensive audit will take weeks, possibly months. And during that time, the system will continue degrading. You'll continue losing clients. The Henderson presentation is already missed. How many more contracts are you willing to lose while you investigate whether I'm trustworthy? So we're supposed to just give you millions of dollars and hope the problems stop? Richard demanded. You're supposed to invest in infrastructure that your business needs. Whether you trust me or not is irrelevant. The technical reality is that Prometheus needs an overhaul, or replacement, David said. From what you've described, it might be more cost-effective to start fresh. Build a new system with proper documentation, redundant expertise, and modern architecture. I smiled. That would take 3 to 4 years, and cost $30 million minimum. But yes, that's an option. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. What about smaller fixes? Like, not the whole overhaul, but targeted improvements that would stop the immediate problems. Targeted improvements are what I've been doing for the past month, I said. They buy time, but they don't solve the underlying issues. It's like patching cracks in a foundation. Eventually, you have to rebuild the foundation or the building falls down. Maybe we should rebuild, Elena said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Maybe it's time to start over. Build something new that multiple people can maintain, that isn't dependent on any one person. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. Was looking at her father, at the consultants, at everyone except her husband. That's a reasonable long-term strategy, Sarah said. In the short term, you'd need to maintain Prometheus while the new system is built, which means you'd still be dependent on, she glanced at her notes, on your CTO's cooperation. Unless we bring in an entire team to reverse engineer Prometheus, David added. It would be expensive and time-consuming, but possible. Especially if we had the source code and documentation, which I'd provide willingly, I said, along with my full cooperation. I'm not trying to hold the company hostage. I'm trying to get fair compensation for what I've built. Fair compensation, Richard repeated. You make $200,000 a year. You live in a house worth $1.2 million. You have benefits, bonuses, stock options. Stock options in a company I don't own any real stake in. Options that you control completely. That can be diluted or eliminated at any time. That's standard for employee compensation. I'm not a standard employee. I rebuilt this company from bankruptcy. I created the only thing that makes you competitive. And I did it thinking I was building something for family, for us, not knowing that I'd always be an outsider. The words came out more raw than I'd intended, more emotional. I saw Elena flinch, saw Margaret's expression harden, saw Richard's face shift from anger to something colder. You're an outsider, because you're acting like one, Richard said quietly. Family doesn't hold each other hostage. Family doesn't watch the business burn to prove a point. Family sacrifices for each other. I sacrificed 3 years of my life saving your company. And we gave you a career, a life, access to a world you'd never have reached on your own. He was standing now, leaning over the table. You came from nothing. A scholarship kid with a chip on his shoulder and some coding skills. We gave you everything, a job, a house, a place in our family, and it's still not enough. It will never be enough, because you'll never believe you deserve to be here. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. He'd said it, finally said what they'd all been thinking, what I'd suspected since the first time I'd had dinner with the Castellano family and felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. That I didn't belong. That I'd never belong. That no matter what I accomplished, I'd always be the outsider who'd married above his station. You're right, I said, and my voice sounded strange, distant. I came from nothing. But I built something extraordinary anyway. Something that saved your legacy, that made you relevant again, that turned a dying company into a $300 million enterprise. And you're right that it's never going to be enough. Because what I want isn't money or recognition or equity. What I want is for you to see me as someone who earned their place here, and you never will. Because in your mind, people like me don't earn anything. We're just lucky to be included. I stood up, closed my laptop. The audit is a good idea. Let them examine everything. They'll find exactly what I've told you, a complex system that needs investment, not a conspiracy. But while they're investigating, while you're deciding whether to trust me or replace me or rebuild from scratch, remember something. I looked at each of them. Richard, Margaret, Marcus, Elena, the consultants who were witnessing the implosion of a family business. I don't need you. I never did. I have skills that are valuable anywhere. I can walk out that door today and have a 6-figure job by tomorrow. But you need Prometheus. And right now, I'm the only person who truly understands it. So when you're making your decisions about my trustworthiness and my value and whether I deserve to be part of this family, remember that I hold more cards than you think. I walked to the door, paused with my hand on the handle. The Henderson presentation? I can have the rendering servers running in 4 hours, but I won't. Not until we have an agreement about my compensation and role that reflects my actual value to this company. So you have a choice. Spend weeks auditing me while the business bleeds clients, or negotiate with me in good faith and get back to making money. Your call. I left before anyone could respond, walked past the executive assistants, who definitely heard every word through the closed door, took the elevator down to the parking garage, got in my car, the car Richard had helped finance like I was some charity case, and drove. Didn't go home. Didn't go back to the office. Just drove north on the highway with no destination in mind, watching the city fall away behind me, feeling the weight of the past 3 years finally lifting. I'd done it, had finally drawn the line, finally made them understand that I wasn't some grateful supplicant begging for scraps. Had proven that I had leverage, power, control, had destroyed my marriage and alienated the only family I had. My phone started ringing. Richard, then Elena, then Marcus, then numbers I didn't recognize, probably the consultants or the CFO or various people who wanted to smooth things over, find a compromise, prevent the total collapse of the company's technical infrastructure. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I pulled off at a rest stop, sat in my car watching trucks roll by, and pulled out my wallet. Took out the $100 bill that Richard had given me at Marcus's party, the one I'd been carrying like a talisman, like proof of my grievance. Benjamin Franklin stared back at me, wise and knowing and completely neutral about the destruction of my life. I'd been so focused on proving my value, on forcing them to recognize what I was worth, that I'd missed the obvious question. What was I worth to myself? Not in dollars, not in equity or recognition or seats at tables, but in terms of who I wanted to be, what kind of man I wanted to see in the mirror. And right now, looking at my reflection in the car window, exhausted, bitter, alone, I wasn't sure I liked the answer. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Elena. "Please come home. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about all the ways the conversation could go. The accusations, the justifications, the careful parsing of who was right and who was wrong, and whether any of it even mattered anymore. Then I started the car and drove home. Because whatever else I'd become over the past month, however bitter or vindictive or calculating, I wasn't someone who ran away from consequences. I'd built this situation, brick by brick, line of code by line of code, and now I was going to see it through to the end. Elena was sitting in the living room when I got home, still wearing the blazer from the meeting. Her hair pulled back so tight it must have hurt. The afternoon light came through the windows at that particular angle that made everything look staged, artificial, like we were actors in a play about a marriage ending. "You're back," she said. "You asked me to come. I didn't think you would." She gestured to the couch across from her, the expensive leather one that her parents had bought us as a wedding present. Everything in this house was a gift, a loan, a reminder of debt. "Sit, please." I sat, and the distance between us felt oceanic, despite being only a few feet. We'd been married 3 years, had made love in this room, had laughed and planned futures, and talked about having children someday. Now we were strangers, negotiating a ceasefire. "That was quite a performance this morning," she said finally. "It wasn't a performance. It was the truth. You threatened to hold the company hostage unless Dad pays you off. How is that not extortion?" "I didn't threaten anything. I stated facts. Prometheus needs investment. I'm the only one who can implement that investment effectively. And I won't continue working 70-hour weeks to save a company that values me at $100. She flinched at the number. "He shouldn't have done that. I've told you that. I've told him that. But that doesn't justify what you're doing." "What am I doing exactly?" "Sabotaging the systems. Letting things fail. Proving some point about how indispensable you are." I leaned back, studied her face. "You really think that? You think I'm actively destroying what I built?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Her voice cracked slightly. "The man I married wouldn't have walked out of a meeting like that. Wouldn't have issued ultimatums. Wouldn't have threatened the company that his wife's family built. The man you married was naive," I said. "He thought that working hard and being loyal and saving the family business would be enough. He thought he'd be treated like family instead of hired help. You are family." "Am I? Because this morning you sat on their side of the table, literally sat with your parents and your brother while they accused me of extortion. You didn't say a word in my defense." "What was I supposed to say?" You walked in there with an ultimatum. You demanded millions of dollars, or you'd let everything burn. How do I defend that? You could have told them about the infrastructure requests I've been making for months, about the budget meetings where your father dismissed every warning I gave, about the fact that I've been working around the clock trying to hold together systems that are failing because they're underfunded and over capacity. I wasn't in those meetings, but you knew about them. I told you. Every night I came home exhausted. Every weekend I spent in the office. Every time I explained that the systems were reaching their limits. You knew. She was quiet for a moment.
I knew you were stressed. I didn't know you were planning this.
This wasn't planned. This is what happens when complex systems fail and the people benefiting from them refuse to invest in maintenance. Stop talking about systems. She stood up suddenly, started pacing. Stop hiding behind technical jargon and engineering metaphors. This is about you being angry that Marcus got the company. This is about ego and pride and feeling like you weren't appreciated enough. You're right, I said, and she stopped pacing, surprised by the admission. I am angry. I am hurt. I do feel unappreciated. But that doesn't make the technical problems less real. Prometheus is failing because it needs investment your father won't authorize. Those are facts, regardless of how I feel about them. Are they? Or are they convenient justifications for you to leverage your knowledge into equity you didn't earn? The word stung. Earn. As if 3 years of 80-hour weeks, of building something from nothing, of saving a dying company, didn't count as earning. I didn't earn equity in the company I saved from bankruptcy? You were paid to do a job. You did the job. That doesn't entitle you to ownership. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, turned the screen toward her. You know what I made last year? $200,000. Generous by most standards. Want to know what the company made because of Prometheus? $127 million in profit. My work generated 600 times my salary in value. And your father thinks equity is unearned? That's how employment works. That's how exploitation works. I created something worth hundreds of millions and got paid a tiny fraction of that value. And when I asked for recognition of that contribution, I was told I should be grateful for the opportunity. Elena sat down again, deflated. What do you want me to say? That Dad's wrong? That you deserve half the company? That we should just hand over millions of dollars because you're upset? I want you to acknowledge that I was treated unfairly. That's all. Not agreement with my methods, not support for my ultimatum, just basic acknowledgement that giving Marcus the entire company while telling me I'm worth $100 was wrong. She looked at me for a long time, and I watched her struggle with it. The loyalty to her family warring with her sense of fairness, with the version of me she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago who probably would have accepted the insult quietly and kept working. It was wrong, she said finally, quietly. The way Dad handled it was wrong. But so is this. Whatever you're doing, whether it's sabotage or just refusing to try your hardest, it's wrong too. 2 wrongs don't make a right. That's a child's logic. Maybe. But it's also true. We sat in silence. Outside, I could hear the neighborhood sounds, a dog barking, someone's lawn service, the distant hum of traffic. Normal sounds for normal people, living normal lives. Not sitting in expensive houses, having conversations about corporate sabotage and failing marriages. The consultants are going to audit everything, Elena said. Dad hired them full-time. They're going to review every line of code, every system, every failure. If you've been manipulating things, they'll find it. Good. Let them look. They'll find exactly what I've told everyone. A complex system under strain that needs investment. And if they find evidence of sabotage, they won't. You sound very confident. I am, because I haven't sabotaged anything. I've let natural degradation happen, declined to work myself to death, fixing every problem instantly, and been honest about what the systems need. That's not sabotage, that's setting boundaries. She laughed bitterly. Setting boundaries. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? Revenge, punishment, making everyone suffer, Because you didn't get what you wanted. I stood up, suddenly tired of the conversation, tired of defending myself, tired of trying to make her understand something she'd already decided not to believe. I'm going to my office. Of course you are, because that's what you do now. Hide behind screens and code and pretend that destroying what you built is somehow noble. I stopped at the doorway. I'm not destroying anything. I'm revealing what was always true, that Prometheus was built by one person, held together by one person, and can't function without that person's active engagement. Your father wanted to believe it was a simple tool he could hand to anyone. I'm showing him it's not. And our marriage? Is that just collateral damage in your war with my father? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Because we both knew the answer, had known it since that night after Marcus's party, when she'd suggested I'd misunderstood her father's insult. Our marriage ended the moment you chose your family over me, I said. I just didn't want to admit it. Her face went pale. I didn't choose. You sat on their side of the table. You defended their position. You questioned my integrity. You did everything except stand beside your husband. Because my husband is acting like someone I don't recognize. No, I said quietly. I'm acting like someone who knows his worth. And you can't stand it. Because it disrupts the narrative, where I'm supposed to be grateful for being allowed into your world. I went to my office before she could respond, closed the door, leaned against it, and waited for my hands to stop shaking. The adrenaline from the confrontation was wearing off, leaving behind exhaustion and something that felt like grief. My phone had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. I scrolled through them without reading most IT, asking for guidance, department heads requesting updates, Richard demanding I call him immediately. The consultants had sent formal requests for access to various systems, documentation, my calendar for the past 6 months. One message stood out, from Marcus, sent 2 hours ago. I know everyone's mad at you, but I get it. If someone gave me $100 and said that's what I'm worth, I'd burn the whole thing down. Let me know if you want to talk. I stared at the message. The kid was 16, had been given a company he didn't understand, was caught in the middle of a war between his father and his brother-in-law, and somehow he was the only one in the family showing basic empathy. I typed back, "Thanks, I appreciate it. And for what it's worth, none of this is your fault." His response came immediately. "Feels like it is. I didn't ask for the company." I know, but take it anyway. Learn it. Make it yours. Just don't make my mistake of thinking that doing good work will make them see you as an equal. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Then, "That's really dark." "Yeah, welcome to adulthood." I set the phone down and pulled up my monitoring systems. The rendering servers were still down. I hadn't lied about that, but I could have them running in about 4 hours if I wanted to. The question was whether I wanted to. The Henderson presentation was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Without renderings, Castellano would look unprepared, unprofessional, would almost certainly lose the contract. That was another $40 million in fees down the drain, another black mark on their recent track record. I could fix it, could work through the night, patch the memory leak, restart the systems, deliver the renderings by dawn, could be the hero again, the indispensable savior who pulled miracles out of disasters. Or I could let them fail, let them experience firsthand what life was like without me constantly sacrificing myself to cover for the infrastructure problems they refused to address. My cursor hovered over the patch file I'd written weeks ago, before I'd even introduced the memory leak. It was already done, already tested, ready to deploy. 4 keystrokes and the servers would start recovering. 8 hours and everything would be back to normal. I closed the file without deploying it. An email arrived from Richard's attorney, not his corporate attorney, his personal one, the one he used for family matters and sensitive negotiations. The subject line read, "Proposed agreement, confidential." I opened it with a sense of inevitability. Here it came, the settlement offer, the negotiation, the attempt to resolve this before it got messier. The email was formal, carefully worded. "Dear Mr. Castellano, at the direction of my client, Richard Castellano, I am writing to propose a settlement regarding your employment status and compensation at Castellano Design and Architecture. In recognition of your contributions to the company's recent success, Mr. Castellano is prepared to offer 1. A one-time bonus of $500,000. 2. Salary increase to $275,000 annually. 3. Enhanced stock options representing 2% of company equity, vesting over 4 years. 4. Continued employment as CTO with standard performance expectations. In exchange, you would 1. Immediately resolve all current technical issues, including rendering server failures. 2. Provide comprehensive documentation of all Prometheus systems. 3. Train a team of developers to share maintenance responsibilities. 4. Sign a confidentiality agreement regarding internal company matters. 5. Refrain from making public statements that could damage the company's reputation. This offer is contingent on the successful completion of items 1 to 3 within 30 days and represents a final settlement of all claims regarding equity or ownership in the company. Please respond within 24 hours if you wish to discuss this proposal. I read it 3 times, analyzing the language like code, looking for bugs and vulnerabilities and hidden dependencies. It was a generous offer by most standards. $500,000, 75,000 salary increase. Actual equity small, but real. They were taking me seriously, treating me like someone with leverage, but it was also a trap. The 30-day deadline was impossible. Training a team to maintain Prometheus in 30 days was laughable. It would take 6 months minimum, and that's if I cooperated fully. They knew that. Which meant either they were setting me up to fail so they could terminate my employment, or they wanted me to decline the offer so they could claim they'd negotiated in good faith. And the confidentiality agreement was the real tell. They didn't just want me to fix the systems and train replacements. They wanted to make sure I could never talk about how I'd been treated, never share my version of events, never damage the Castellano reputation by revealing that their miracle turnaround had been built on the back of someone they'd valued at $100. I drafted 3 different responses. The first was professional, asking for clarification on the timeline and suggesting revisions to the terms. The second was angry, pointing out the impossibility of their demands and the insulting nature of buying my silence. The third was honest, explaining that no amount of money would fix what had broken between us. I sent none of them. Instead, I forwarded the email to my personal account, the one they didn't monitor, and started documenting everything. Screenshots of the infrastructure requests Richard had denied, emails showing the warnings I'd given about system capacity, budget proposals that had been rejected, the meeting minutes from Marcus's birthday party planning where Richard had discussed the company transfer without mentioning me once. If they wanted to negotiate, we'd negotiate. But I'd do it with evidence, with documentation, with the same careful preparation I'd put into building Prometheus. A knock on the office door. I didn't answer, but Elena came in anyway. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and one of my MIT sweatshirts, something she used to do when we first started dating, when wearing my clothes felt intimate and playful. Now, it just felt like she was trying to remind me of who we used to be. I talked to Dad, she said, leaning against the door frame. He's really stressed. The consultants told him the audit could take weeks, and he's terrified of losing more clients. Then he should accept that infrastructure investment is necessary. He sent you an offer. A good offer. You read my email? He sent it to me too. He wanted me to help convince you to take it. Of course he did. She came further into the room, sat in the chair across from my desk. It's generous, you know. $500,000, equity, a big raise. Most people would jump at that. Most people didn't save a bankrupt company and get told they're worth $100. Can you let that go? Please? He made a mistake. He was angry. He's sorry. He's not sorry. He's scared. There's a difference. Does it matter? He's trying to make things right. I turned my chair to face her fully. Elena, let me explain something about negotiation. When someone lowballs you, insults you, treats you like you're worthless, and then suddenly offers you something generous, it's not because they've had a change of heart. It's because they've realized you have leverage and they're trying to neutralize it as cheaply as possible. That's such a cynical way to look at it. It's accurate. Your father isn't offering me this because he values me. He's offering it because he's afraid of what happens if he doesn't. And you're going to refuse it? Out of spite? I'm going to refuse it because the timeline is impossible. The confidentiality clause is designed to silence me, and I'm worth more than 2% of a company I rebuilt. She stood up abruptly. You're never going to be satisfied, are you? Whatever we offer, it won't be enough. Because this isn't really about money or equity or recognition. It's about punishing us for not treating you like you're special. I am special. I did something extraordinary, and I want to be compensated accordingly. You want to be worshipped, she said, and her voice was sharp now, cutting. You want everyone to bow down and acknowledge your genius, and thank you for gracing us with your presence. But that's not how the world works. That's not how family works. You're right, I said. Family doesn't work that way. Family supports each other, defends each other, stands together when outsiders attack. But I'm not family, am I? I'm just the guy who married the daughter, the useful tool who should know his place. Stop saying that. Why? It's true. Your father said it this morning. I came from nothing. You gave me everything. I should be grateful. Well, I'm not grateful anymore. I'm done being grateful for the privilege of being exploited. Tears were streaming down her face now. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make this right. You can't, I said, and I was surprised by how gentle my voice sounded. Because fixing this would require your family to see me differently, and they never will. I'll always be the outsider who got lucky, the hired hand who doesn't understand his place, and you'll always choose them over me. You've already proven that. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Elena. I learned that a long time ago. You're just learning it now. She stood there for a moment longer, crying silently, looking like she wanted to say something else. But whatever it was, she swallowed it, turned and left, closing the door quietly behind her. I sat in the silence of my office, surrounded by screens and servers and the quiet hum of systems that only I fully understood. Outside, the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. The world continuing on, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in expensive houses and corporate conference rooms. My phone buzzed. Another email from Richard's attorney. I've been asked to emphasize that this offer expires in 24 hours. After that, the company will pursue other remedies. Remedies. Legal speak for, we'll try to destroy you. I should have been scared. Should have been worried about lawsuits and unemployment and the implosion of my life. But instead, I felt calm, clear. Like I'd finally stopped trying to be someone I wasn't. Stopped pretending that working hard and being loyal would be enough. I pulled up the rendering server patch, the one I could deploy in minutes, that would fix the immediate crisis and buy Richard time to negotiate. And then I pulled up something else, the master authentication system, the one that controlled access to every external service Prometheus relied on, the keys to the kingdom. I'd been careful so far, had let things degrade naturally, had declined to prevent failures rather than actively causing them, had operated in the gray area between sabotage and boundary setting. But if they wanted to threaten me, to give me ultimatums, to pursue remedies, then maybe it was time to show them exactly how much power I actually had. I started documenting every authentication key, every API endpoint, every service dependency. Not to use, not yet, but to have ready. To know exactly which dominoes to push if they forced my hand. Because Richard had been right about one thing. I did have leverage. He just didn't understand how much. And if they wanted to find out, if they wanted to play hardball and threaten remedies and give me 24-hour ultimatums, then I'd show them exactly what I was capable of. But first, I needed to be absolutely certain of something. I needed to know if I was still fighting for justice, or if I'd crossed the line into pure revenge. And looking at my reflection in the dark computer screen, I wasn't sure I knew the answer anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was working, though my office looked like I had been monitors, glowing in the darkness. Coffee cups multiplying on the desk. The kind of controlled chaos that used to mean I was deep in a problem. But I wasn't coding, wasn't fixing, wasn't doing anything productive. I was just sitting there, watching the clock count down the 24 hours Richard's attorney had given me. 23 hours, 22, 21. The house was quiet around me. Elena had gone to bed around 11, hadn't said goodnight, hadn't checked on me. The separation was complete now, even if we were still technically living under the same roof. Two people orbiting each other in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Everything carefully curated, nothing truly ours. At 2:47 a.m., I pulled up the authentication systems again, studied them the way a chess player studies a board, seeing not just the current position, but all the possible futures branching from each move. If I revoked access to the rendering servers, Prometheus would be crippled but not dead. If I pulled the material pricing APIs, the estimating department would revert to calling suppliers manually, losing the speed advantage that had made Castellano competitive. If I shut down the collaboration tools, the entire distributed workflow would fragment. Each piece seemed small, but together they were everything. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is David Chen from Blackstone Technical. I know it's late, but I wanted to reach out before things get more complicated. Can we talk? Off the record." I stared at the message, trying to decode it. Off the record. The consultant wanted to talk without his client knowing, which meant either he'd found something damning or he'd found nothing and wanted to warn me. I typed back, "I'm up. Call me." The phone rang within seconds. "Thanks for answering," David said. His voice was tired, probably running on the same coffee and adrenaline mixture that was keeping me conscious. "I wanted to give you a heads up. The audit isn't going well." Not well for Richard or not well for me? Both, maybe. The system architecture it's actually brilliant. Incredibly efficient, well optimized, exactly the kind of work you'd expect from someone who really understands distributed systems. But it's also dependent on me. Extremely. And that's the problem. My colleague Sarah is convinced you designed it that way intentionally. Built in dependencies that only you control, so you'd have leverage. That's not why I did it. "I believe you," he said. And he sounded sincere. I've seen this pattern before. Startup founder, moving fast, using whatever credentials and accounts are available, planning to clean it up later, but never getting around to it. It's actually more common than people think. But it's also indistinguishable from intentional sabotage if someone wants to interpret it that way. And right now, your father-in-law really wants to interpret it that way. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes. "What did you find in the logs?" "That's the thing. The degradation timeline matches exactly what you said. Problems started showing up 6 weeks before the birthday party. Progressive failures consistent with a system under increasing load. If you're sabotaging, you're doing it in a way that perfectly mimics natural degradation. Because it is natural degradation, maybe, or maybe you're just really good at covering your tracks." He paused. "Look, I'm calling because I think you should take the settlement offer. It's generous. The timeline is negotiable despite what the attorney said, and walking away with $500,000 and equity is better than what's coming if you don't." "What's coming?" "Richard is talking to his lawyers about termination for cause. Breach of fiduciary duty, sabotage, maybe even criminal charges if they can make a case for computer fraud. He's angry and scared people do stupid things. He can't prove sabotage. He doesn't need to. He can make your life hell trying, tie you up in lawsuits, freeze your accounts, make sure you never work in this industry again. And even if you win eventually, the process will destroy you." I laughed, harsh and bitter. "So I should take the money and be quiet? Let him rewrite history, make me sign an NDA, pretend that I was just an employee who did his job and should be grateful for the opportunity?" I'm saying pick your battles. This one is going to cost you more than you'll gain. You don't know what it's cost me already. I know you're sleeping in your office while your marriage falls apart. I know you look like you haven't eaten in days. I know you're sitting there at 3 a.m. staring at code instead of fixing the problems that could save your career. His voice softened. I've been where you are. Different situation, same feeling. The sense that you've been wronged and you need to prove it, need to make them see, need to extract some kind of justice from people who'll never give it to you. How did your situation turn out? I lost everything. My company, my savings, 3 years of my life to litigation, won the moral victory, lost everything else. That's why I'm calling, because I see you heading down the same path, and I'm trying to save you from it. I was quiet for a long moment, listening to the hum of my servers, the distant sound of a car passing outside, the white noise of a life unraveling. What would you do? I asked finally. If you were me? Honestly, I'd take the settlement, document everything, and write a tell-all book in 5 years when the NDA expires. Get rich off the story, instead of destroying yourself for principles that nobody else cares about. That's pretty cynical. That's survival. Principles don't pay rent, and moral victories don't rebuild careers. We talked for another 20 minutes. He told me about his case, a startup he'd co-founded, a partner who'd pushed him out, a lawsuit that had technically vindicated him while practically ruining him. Told me about the 2 years of unemployment, the blacklist that followed, the way that being right had mattered less than being difficult. The thing about leverage, he said before hanging up, is that it only works if you're willing to use it. And if you use it, you better be prepared for the consequences. Because the people you're fighting have more resources, more connections, and less to lose than you think. After he hung up, I sat in the darkness thinking about consequences. About what happened after you pulled the trigger, after you deployed the code that brought everything down, after you proved your point and won your moral victory. Would it feel like justice? Or just like destruction? At 4:30 a.m., I got up and walked through the house, stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, watching Elena sleep. She was curled on her side, still wearing my MIT sweatshirt, and in the dim light, she looked young and vulnerable and like someone I used to know. We'd met at a tech conference in Boston. She'd been there with her father, learning the business, and I'd been presenting my graduate research on distributed systems optimization. Afterward, she'd approached me with questions that were intelligent and engaged, not the kind of polite small talk that beautiful women sometimes use when they're being social. We'd gone for coffee, then dinner, then a weekend in Vermont that had turned into the most intense 3 months of my life. She'd been fascinated by my world, the code, the problems, the intellectual challenges that I navigated daily. And I'd been fascinated by hers, the confidence, the connections, the ease with which she moved through spaces that intimidated me. "You're brilliant," she'd told me once, early on, when I'd explained some complex algorithm I was working on. Like, actually brilliant, not just smart, brilliant. No one had ever called me that before. Smart, yes. Good at math, technically proficient, hardworking. But brilliant was different. Brilliant meant special, exceptional, worthy. I'd believed her. Had believed that she saw something in me that justified the class jump, the cultural differences, the fact that her parents had looked at me like I was an interesting specimen during our first dinner together. Had believed right up until the moment she'd sat on their side of the conference table and watched them accuse me of extortion. I left her sleeping and went back to my office. Opened my email to find 17 new messages, most of them from Castellano employees asking for guidance on the rendering servers, on project timelines, on whether they should tell their clients to expect delays. One email stood out, from Sarah Kim, the other consultant, sent at 4:03 a.m. I don't usually do this, but I'm compiling my section of the audit report, and I wanted to ask you something directly. Did you build Prometheus with the intention of making yourself irreplaceable? Or did it just work out that way? I've reviewed the architecture extensively. It's sophisticated work, exactly what you'd need for a company this size. But it's also structured in a way that creates single points of failure, that concentrates knowledge and control in one person's hands. That could be coincidence, or it could be design. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm genuinely trying to understand. Because my report is going to determine whether Richard pursues legal action against you, and I'd rather get this right than get it wrong. If you want to explain your thinking, your design philosophy, your reasons for the choices you made, I'm listening. Off the record, no attorneys, just engineer to engineer. I read it 3 times, looking for the trap, but it felt sincere, like David's call had felt sincere. Like maybe these consultants weren't just hired guns, but actual professionals trying to do their jobs well. I started typing a response, deleted it, started again. Dear Sarah, I built Prometheus in 4 months while working 80-hour weeks to save a company that was 6 months from bankruptcy. I used my own accounts and credentials because the company's IT infrastructure was a disaster and I needed to move fast. I concentrated the architecture around systems I understood because I was the only developer and I needed to build something I could maintain alone. Was it good design? Technically, yes. The system works exactly as intended, it's fast, accurate, and has enabled the company to scale from near bankruptcy to $370 million in valuation. Was it sustainable design? No, I knew that. I told Richard repeatedly that we needed to invest in documentation, training, redundancy. He said no every time, because it was expensive, and everything was working fine. Did I make myself irreplaceable? Yes, but not intentionally. I made myself indispensable through the quality of my work and the depth of my knowledge. The irreplaceable part came later, when Richard refused to invest in the infrastructure that would have let others share the load. You asked for my design philosophy. Here it is. I build things that work. I solve problems as elegantly as I can with the resources available, and I trust that the people I'm building for will recognize value when they see it. I was wrong about that last part. As for whether I'm sabotaging the system now, I'm not. I'm letting it fail naturally when I'm not actively preventing those failures through unpaid overtime and heroic effort. I'm setting boundaries around how much of myself I'm willing to sacrifice for people who've made it clear they see me as a tool, not a person. Is that sabotage? Or is it just refusing to be exploited? I genuinely don't know anymore. I read it over, finger hovering over the send button. It was honest, maybe too honest, showed vulnerability, uncertainty, the kind of internal conflict that could be used against me if Sarah decided to include it in her report. But I was tired of performing, tired of carefully managing perceptions and maintaining the facade of the confident, competent CTO who had everything under control. I hit send. The response came back within minutes. Thank you for the honesty. For what it's worth, I don't think you're a saboteur. I think you're someone who built something beautiful and is watching other people take credit for it while blaming you when it breaks. That's not sabotage. That's just tragic. My report will reflect what I found. A sophisticated system that needs investment. A developer who concentrated knowledge because he was working alone. And a management team that ignored warnings until it was too late. What Richard does with that information is up to him. Take care of yourself, and maybe consider that some fights aren't worth winning. I sat back, feeling something loosen in my chest. Validation, maybe. Or just the relief of being seen clearly by someone who didn't have an agenda. At 6:15 a.m., Elena appeared in my doorway with 2 cups of coffee. She looked like she'd slept poorly, shadows under her eyes, hair uncombed. She set 1 cup on my desk without speaking, then sat in the chair across from me. I've been thinking, she said finally, about what you said, about me choosing them over you. Elena, let me finish. She took a breath. You're right. I did choose them. At the meeting, at the party, probably 100 other times over the past month when I should have stood up for you and didn't, and I've been trying to understand why. I waited. Not sure if I wanted to hear this. I think it's because I've never had to choose before. My whole life, everything has just worked out. My family had money. I had opportunities. Conflicts got smoothed over by lawyers and checkbooks and social connections. I've never had to pick a side because there were never really sides. Just family, taking care of each other. Until I became inconvenient. Until you stopped fitting the narrative. The grateful son-in-law, the brilliant employee who saved the company and was happy with his salary and his nice house. When you started demanding more, started insisting on recognition and equity and a seat at the table, you became a problem. And I didn't know how to reconcile the man I loved with the problem my family kept describing. She was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't bother wiping away. I'm sorry, she said, for sitting on their side, for not defending you. for making you feel like you had to prove your worth when I should have been proving mine as your wife. I felt something crack inside me, some defensive wall I'd built over the past weeks. Why are you telling me this now? Because in 11 hours you have to decide whether to take Dad's offer or walk away. And I wanted you to know that whatever you choose, I'll support it. I'll stand with you. Even if it means standing against my family. Elena, I mean it. If you want to refuse the offer, burn it all down. Prove your point. I'll be there. And if you want to take the money and walk away, start over somewhere else, I'll come with you. I'm choosing you. I should have chosen you from the beginning. I looked at her, this woman I'd married 3 years ago, who I'd built an empire to save, who I'd nearly destroyed myself trying to prove worthy of. And I saw something I hadn't seen in weeks, actual love. Not obligation or guilt or family loyalty, but the real thing, complicated and imperfect, and probably too late. You know what's funny? I said. A month ago, that's all I wanted. You choosing me, standing beside me. And now that you're offering it, I don't know if it's enough. What do you mean? I mean that even if you support me, even if you stand with me, your family is still going to see me as the villain. They're still going to tell the story where I held the company hostage, where I was ungrateful and vindictive and petty, and you'll be caught in the middle forever. That's my choice to make. Is it? Can you really cut off your family? Your mother? Your brother? Your father? Can you live with that? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, but I know I can't live with losing you. The deadline ticked down. 10 hours. 9. 8. At noon, I got a call from Richard. Not an email, not a message from his attorney. Just him, calling directly for the first time in weeks. I'd like to meet, he said. No preamble, no pleasantries, just the two of us, before the deadline. Why? Quote, because this has gotten out of hand. Because we're family. Or we're supposed to be. Because I'd like to try talking before the lawyers take over. Completely. You accused me of extortion. I know. I was angry. I'm still angry. But I'm also scared. And I think you are too. So let's talk. Clear the air. See if there's a way forward that doesn't destroy everything. I looked at Elena, who was still sitting across from me, watching with hope and fear mixed together in her expression. Where? I asked. The office. Conference room A. 1 o'clock. Just us. He hung up before I could agree or refuse, just assumed I'd come. The same assumption of compliance he'd always had. The same certainty that I'd eventually fall in line. Are you going to go? Elena asked. I don't know. Maybe it's a trap. Maybe he's recording it, building a case. Or maybe he actually wants to fix this. I laughed. You have more faith in your father than I do. I have faith in people being able to surprise you, for better or worse. At 12:45, I got in my car and drove to the office, watched the city pass by, the familiar route I'd taken 1,000 times, and wondered if this was the last time. If, after today, I'd be unemployed, divorced, blacklisted from the industry I'd spent my life in, or if somehow, impossibly, there was still a path forward. The building was quiet when I arrived. Skeleton crew on Saturday, just security and a few people working on urgent projects. The conference room was dark when I walked past it toward Richard's office, but then I saw him inside, sitting at the head of the table where he'd accused me of extortion 3 days ago. I opened the door, sat down across from him, and waited to see if this was going to be an execution or a negotiation. Thank you for coming, he said. And despite everything, all the anger and hurt and betrayal, I heard something in his voice I hadn't expected. He sounded old, tired, and genuinely afraid of losing everything, just like me. Richard looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not physically, he was still the imposing figure who commanded rooms, who'd built an empire through force of will and vision. But something in his posture had collapsed, his shoulders curving inward, like a building losing its structural integrity. I owe you an apology, he said. The words hung in the air between us, unexpected and heavy. I'd prepared for threats, for negotiation tactics, for the kind of hardball corporate maneuvering that men like Richard excelled at. Not this. For which part? I asked. The $100. That was cruel. I was angry about you questioning me in front of guests. Angry that you were asking for equity on Marcus's birthday of all days. And I lashed out. He paused, looking down at his hands. It was unforgivable. Margaret told me so. Elena told me so. Hell, even Marcus told me I was an asshole. You were. I know. He looked up, met my eyes. But I need you to understand something. When I gave Marcus the company, it wasn't about you. It was never about you. It was about legacy, about family, about making sure that what I built survives me. At my expense. Yes, at your expense. Because in that moment, I chose my son over my son-in-law, and I didn't think about what that would mean to you. Didn't think about how it would feel to watch someone else get handed what you'd earned. I leaned back, studying him. You're afraid, terrified. The admission came easily, like he was too tired to pretend otherwise. The consultants say the system is brilliant but fragile. That losing you would set us back years, cost millions, maybe destroy everything we've built. And I realized that I gambled wrong, that I treated you like an employee when I should have treated you like a partner. So now you want to make me a partner? Because you're scared? I want to make things right. Whether that makes me a good man or just a desperate one, I honestly don't know anymore. The honesty was disarming. I'd expected manipulation, corporate doublespeak, the kind of careful language that lawyers prep their clients to use. Not this raw admission of fear and regret. The settlement offer, I said, the timeline is impossible. I know. My attorney is an idiot. I told him to put pressure on you and he went overboard. Richard pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then showed me the screen. Here's what I'm actually offering. No deadlines, no performance clauses, no bullshit. I read the email he'd drafted. 5% equity, vesting immediately. Salary increase to $300,000. Carte blanche on infrastructure spending, whatever you say Prometheus needs, you get. Full documentation and training timeline set by you, not by arbitrary deadlines. And a formal apology, in writing, acknowledging your contribution to the company's success. And the confidentiality agreement? I asked. Gone. You want to write a book someday? Write a book. You want to give interviews? Give interviews. I'm not trying to buy your silence. I'm trying to buy your cooperation. 5% is more than the 2% you offered before. 2% was an insult. 5% of a $300 million company is $15 million. That's closer to fair, even if it's not perfect. I set his phone down, looked at him carefully. Why now? Why the sudden change of heart? Because Sarah Kim told me something yesterday. She said, you're not sabotaging anything, you're just exhausted. That you've been holding the whole thing together through force of will and unpaid overtime, and you finally stopped. She said the only person who's been acting in bad faith is me. She's right. I know. And Marcus said something too. He asked me what I would do if someone saved my company, and then I gave it to someone else and told the savior he was worth $100. He said he'd burn it all down, and he wouldn't blame anyone who did. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Your son is smarter than you think. He's smarter than I want to admit. Keeps pointing out my bullshit in ways I can't ignore. Richard leaned forward. Look, I'm not good at this. At apologizing, at admitting I was wrong, at treating people fairly when it conflicts with what I want. But I'm trying, because losing the company would be bad. Losing my daughter's marriage would be worse. And losing both because I was too proud to admit I screwed up would be unforgivable. Elena told you about us? She didn't have to. I have eyes. I see how she looks at you, how you look at each other, like you're already divorced, just going through the motions until it's official. The observation stung because it was accurate. This isn't just about business anymore. I know, but maybe fixing the business is the first step to fixing the rest. Maybe if I show you that I actually value what you've done, that I see you as more than just hired help, maybe that helps Elena choose between us. Because right now, she's being forced to choose, and that's my fault. I thought about Elena that morning, offering to stand with me. About the look on her face when she'd said she was choosing me. Finally, after weeks of choosing them. "What happens to Marcus?" I asked. "You give me 5% equity. That comes from somewhere. It comes from my share. Marcus keeps his majority stake. This is me paying you what I should have paid you 3 years ago. And the CTO position? Yours for as long as you want it. With real authority, real budget control, real partnership. No more asking permission to fix things. You're the expert. I'll trust your judgment." It was everything I'd asked for, everything I'd fought for. Recognition, equity, authority, respect, delivered not through extortion or leverage, but through what seemed like genuine contrition. And I didn't trust it. "I need time," I said, "to think, to talk to Elena, to figure out if this is real or just another negotiation tactic." "Fair enough. Take the weekend. But please, think about it seriously, because I mean what I'm saying. You saved my company. You deserve to own part of it." I stood up, headed for the door, then stopped. "The rendering servers. I can have them running in 4 hours. And will you?" I looked back at him. This man who'd insulted me, undervalued me, nearly destroyed my marriage, who was now offering me everything I demanded. "I'll let you know Monday," I said, and walked out before he could respond. I drove for 2 hours without destination, just pointed the car north and let the highway carry me away from the city, away from the office, away from decisions I wasn't ready to make. The landscape gradually shifted from urban sprawl to suburbs to the kind of open countryside that makes you feel small in a clarifying way. Around mile marker 73, I pulled into a rest stop, sat in my car watching families shuffle between bathrooms and vending machines, living their normal lives with their normal problems. A father arguing with his teenager about college applications. A mother trying to convince her toddler that, yes, we really do need to use the bathroom before we get back in the car. Simple conflicts with simple resolutions. I envied them. My phone had been buzzing periodically. Elena asking where I was. Marcus sending another message. "Dad says you guys talked. Hope it went okay?" Sarah Kim forwarding her completed audit report with a note. "Thought you should see this before Richard does." I opened Sarah's email first. The report was comprehensive, professional, and devastatingly fair. Executive summary. Prometheus represents sophisticated software architecture implemented under significant time and resource constraints. The system functions as designed and has demonstrably delivered substantial value to Castellano design and architecture. However, the architecture exhibits several characteristics that create operational risk. 1. Concentrated knowledge. Primary developer is sole repository of critical system understanding. 2. External dependencies. Multiple third-party services authenticated through personal accounts. 3. Documentation deficit. Limited technical documentation for knowledge transfer. 4. Single points of failure. Key systems lack redundancy or backup personnel. Sabotage allegations. Our investigation found no evidence of intentional sabotage. System degradation patterns are consistent with infrastructure operating beyond designed capacity. All failures can be attributed to increased workload, 300% growth over 3 years, deferred infrastructure investment, technical debt accumulation, normal software aging and complexity growth. The concentration of system knowledge in one individual appears to be circumstantial rather than intentional. This is a common pattern in rapid development scenarios and does not indicate malicious design. Recommendations. 1. Immediate infrastructure investment, $5, 6M, to address capacity issues. 2. Comprehensive documentation initiative, 12 to 18 months. 3. Hiring of senior developers to share maintenance burden. 4. Retention of current CTO with enhanced compensation reflecting actual value delivered. 5. Long-term architectural review for sustainability improvements. The alternative, replacing current CTO or rebuilding from scratch, would likely cost $20, 30M, and require 3 to 4 years, with significant business disruption. I read it twice. She'd exonerated me completely, while simultaneously showing Richard exactly how dependent they were on me. It was a masterpiece of professional objectivity that somehow managed to validate everything I'd been saying for months. And it terrified me, because now I had no excuse. No reason to refuse Richard's offer except pride or spite or the deep gnawing fear that accepting it would mean admitting that their initial treatment of me had been wrong but not unforgivable. That I could be bought, even if the price was finally fair. A text from Elena. Please come home. We need to talk. Really talk. I started the car, turned around, headed back toward the city. The drive back felt shorter, like time was compressing, pushing me toward a decision point I'd been avoiding. Elena was waiting on the front steps when I pulled up. Still wearing my MIT sweatshirt, arms wrapped around her knees, looking young and scared and like the woman I'd fallen in love with at that conference in Boston. I was worried, she said as I approached. You just disappeared. Needed to think. Did it help? Not really. She stood, and I followed her inside. We ended up in the kitchen neutral territory, not my office or our bedroom or any of the spaces that had become battlegrounds over the past month. She made tea, her hands moving through the familiar ritual, and I watched her like I was memorizing something I might lose. Dad called, she said, setting a mug in front of me. Told me about the new offer. 5% equity, no strings. What do you think? I think he's actually sorry. I've never heard him sound like that, scared and small and genuinely regretful. It was unsettling. He should be scared. The company falls apart without me. I know. We all know. That's what makes this so hard. She sat across from me, cupped her own mug like she was trying to warm her hands. Because part of me wants you to take the offer. Accept the apology. Let us all move forward. But another part of me knows that even if you do, something's broken that can't be fixed. Between us or between me and your family? Both. All of it. She looked up, and her eyes were red. I've been lying to myself, you know, telling myself that if Dad just apologized, if he just gave you what you deserved, everything would go back to normal. But there is no normal anymore. We can't unknow what we've learned about each other. What have we learned? That I'll always choose them first when I'm scared. That you'll always resent being the outsider, no matter how much they try to include you. That our marriage was built on hope and good intentions, instead of on actually understanding what we were getting into. The honesty was brutal and clarifying. So what do? I don't know, but I know we can't keep pretending. Can't keep living in this house that my parents bought, working at this company that my father built, trying to force ourselves into shapes that don't fit. I sipped my tea, thought about shapes and fitting and the way I'd spent 3 years trying to mold myself into the perfect son-in-law, the grateful outsider, the brilliant savior who knew his place. If I take the offer, I said slowly, I stay. Keep working for your father. Keep living in this house. Keep being the CTO who saved the company. And we try to rebuild our marriage on top of all the resentment and hurt and betrayal. And if you don't, I walk away from the company, from the equity, from your family, and probably from you, because I don't know how we survive that kind of rupture. She was crying now, silently, tears running down her face. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose you either, but I don't know if wanting is enough. We sat in silence, drinking tea that had gone lukewarm, watching the afternoon light fade through the kitchen windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock was ticking. Outside, neighbors were living their lives, oblivious to the small tragedy unfolding in the expensive house on the corner. My phone buzzed. Can I come over? I know it's weird, but I want to talk to you before you decide anything. I showed Elena the message. She nodded. Let him come. Maybe he'll say something that helps. 20 minutes later, Marcus was sitting in our living room, still looking uncomfortable in the adult clothes he'd started wearing. He had a folder with him, which he set on the coffee table between us. I've been doing research, he said, about company valuations, equity structures, what's fair. Because I realized I have no idea what any of this means. Dad gave me a company, and I didn't even know enough to ask what that actually meant. He opened the folder, pulled out printouts covered in highlighted sections and handwritten notes. So here's what I learned. Prometheus, the system you built, is responsible for basically all our competitive advantage. Without it, we're just another architecture firm. With it, we're 3 times faster and more accurate than anyone else. That's worth somewhere between 40 and 60% of the company's total value. Marcus, let me finish. Dad's offering you 5%. That's $15 million, which sounds like a lot. But if the system is worth 60% of a $300 million company, that's $180 million. 5% isn't fair. It's not even close to fair. Elena and I exchanged glances. Her 16-year-old brother had just done more honest accounting than his father's entire executive team. I can't give you equity, Marcus continued. Dad controls my shares through a trust until I'm 25. But I wanted you to know that what happened to you was wrong. And that if I actually earn this company someday, if I learn it and understand it and make it mine, I'll remember that you're the reason it still exists. He stood up awkwardly, like he'd said what he came to say, and didn't know what else to do. For what it's worth, he added, I think you should take the money and leave. Start your own company. Build something that's actually yours. Because even if Dad gives you equity and apologizes and treats you better, you'll always be working for him. And I don't think you're someone who's meant to work for other people. After he left, Elena and I sat in the silence he'd created. He's right, she said finally. You're not meant to work for other people. You're meant to build things, lead things, own things. And you'll never be able to do that here. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe the answer isn't choosing between the offer and walking away. Maybe it's negotiating something different, something that actually makes sense for who you are. Like what? Like taking the money, but leaving anyway. Use the equity as seed funding for your own company. Build something that's yours from the ground up. Something nobody can take from you, or give to their son, or tell you isn't really yours. The idea settled over me like a revelation. Not revenge, not capitulation, but a third option I hadn't seen because I'd been so focused on the binary choice between staying and leaving. And us? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, maybe we separate for a while. Give each other space to figure out who we are when we're not trying to navigate my family's expectations. See if there's still something real underneath all the performance and obligation. That sounds like the beginning of a divorce. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way we survive this. By admitting that we can't fix everything, can't go back to who we were, but might be able to find something new if we're brave enough to try. My phone buzzed again. The Henderson presentation is rescheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. They're giving us one more chance. Please. I looked at the message. Thought about Richard sitting in that conference room looking small and scared. Thought about 3 years of work, of late nights and sacrifices, and the strange pride that comes from building something extraordinary. Thought about Marcus's research, and Sarah's report, and Elena's suggestion, and the rendering servers that I could fix in 4 hours. I'm going to the office, I said. Elena looked up, surprised. To fix the servers? To make a counteroffer. Richard was still in the office when I arrived at 7 p.m. His lights were on, casting shadows through the frosted glass of his door. I didn't knock, just walked in and sat down across from his desk. I'm going to fix the rendering servers, I said. Henderson will have their presentation Monday morning. Full 3D renderings, exactly what they asked for. He looked up, relief flooding his face. Thank you. I'm not finished. I'll fix the servers, train a transition team, and document everything. But then I'm leaving. The relief vanished. What? Your offer is generous. 5% equity, real authority, an actual apology. A year ago, it would have been everything I wanted. But Marcus was right about something. I'm not meant to work for other people, even when those people finally treat me fairly. So what are you proposing? I pulled out my laptop, opened the document I drafted during the drive back. I want 10% equity, vesting immediately. In exchange, I'll spend 6 months doing a complete knowledge transfer. I'll document every system, train your new team, ensure Prometheus can run without me. At the end of 6 months, I walk away with my equity stake. and you have a fully functional system with people who understand it. 10% is Brady. What I'm worth. What Marcus's research showed I'm worth. What the system I built is actually worth to your company. Richard leaned back, studying me. And after 6 months, I start my own firm, software consulting for architecture and design companies. I'll even give Castellano a preferential rate for ongoing support, but I won't be your employee anymore. I'll be your partner, then your vendor, then just someone you once knew who helped save your company. Elena, that's between me and her, but we both need space to figure out who we are when we're not performing for your family. He was quiet for a long time, fingers drumming on his desk. I watched him calculate the cost of losing me entirely versus the cost of giving me what I was asking. The risk of accepting versus the certainty of rejection. 15%, he said finally. What? 15% equity. Because 10% is what you're worth, but 15 is what I owe you for the $100 bill and the disrespect and the way I've treated you like hired help instead of the person who saved everything I built. I stared at him, speechless. Take it, he said. Fix the servers, train the team, build your company. And maybe someday, when enough time has passed, we can figure out how to be family again. Real family. Not the performance we've been doing. I stood up, extended my hand. He took it. Monday morning, I said. Henderson gets their renderings. And Monday afternoon? We start the transition. 6 months, Richard. Then I'm free. He nodded. Then you're free. I walked out of his office, pulled out my phone, and started the process of fixing what I'd let break. Not for them, for me. Because I was finally worth more than $100.